Yamashita, Senator Mabini, Senator Chris Duenas, Senator Moneth Tyron, Senator Palacios, Vice Speaker Cruz, Senator Respicio, Senator Tony Ada. You're so far way back there. I almost can't see you. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 with me. Okay, let me see. Okay, where's the agenda?
It was more productive than yeah.
Hey, Mike Benito didn't like your bill, huh?
Which one?
No privatization?
Oh, no, actually,
He was okay?
they said, that bill was designed to protect you guys.
Good morning, Senators. We're going to resume. It is now 9:16, and thank you, Senators, for coming this morning. I have Senator Barnes, Yamashita, Mabini, Duenas, Tyron, Palacios, Vice Speaker, Respicio, and Tom Ada, Tony Ada. Thank you very much. I'm going to move down to Bill number 58 on the agenda, and I recognize the author, Senator Tony Ada.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Good morning, Madam Speaker. I'd like to make a motion to move Bill 5831 to the third reading file to speak on it, please.
Yes, you may proceed.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Bill 5831 COR is an act to add a new section to 4128 as added into Chapter 4 of 4 GCA to read. And this piece of legislation is just to allow those who have the skills for sign language or foreign language interpreters for their supervisors or their administrators to grant them administrative leave to interpret for official government functions. As you may recall, back when the last Okinawan delegation was here, that we had a foreign language interpreter who, to our surprise, was a part of our government of Guam system. And when she was done with her duties, she was hoping that when she gets back to work that she would be able to be granted administrative leave for that time that she was interpreting for the foreign language for the Okinawan delegation to us here at the legislature. And this bill just allows that to happen to where the administrators or supervisors may grant administrative leave for such a function with these expertise and their skills. We have a lot of them in our system, and just sharing them amongst one another. We are still, we have 3 different branches of government, but yet we're still one government. We're still the government of Guam. And sharing resources, especially during these times, makes a lot of common sense for us to do right now. And all it does is just allows, like I said again, it allows the administrators or the supervisors to grant admin leave. And however, to protect our agencies too, the person who's requesting it must also give advance notice to the supervisors And that would in turn take care of the the situation, whether they're going to go ahead and grant them, or so it doesn't find any agency short of what they need, but yet if they're available, that they can have them go out to another agency. And I would also like to add, if there's no objections, Senator Tina Rose Munoz Barnes is a second co-sponsor, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Sorry, on that amendment then to add Senator Barnes as a co-sponsor without any objections, so ordered. Is there anybody else who would like to speak on? Okay, Senator Barnes, you're recognized.
Manana Sizuas, Madam Speaker, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak and rise in support of Bill number 58-31 CR as introduced by my good colleague, Senator Tony Ada. Madam Speaker, this bill, as you know, will truly address the concerns of the communication method that is needed when translation for both, whether it be a foreign language or through interpretation of sign language, would really address in making sure that the government continues to work together when the need arises for actual interpretation. I do know that some of the concerns were raised about the responsible party and the admitting of this administrative leave to work with this to do this kind of responsibility for another agency. But Madam Speaker, I'd like to remind our own folks that in our government, we are one government of Guam. Government of Guam is to provide for the basic services, and when there needs to be interpretation, expertise is needed for interpretation of whether it be sign, whether it be through foreign language, then we should be able to tap our own government employees to be able to share in the need of making sure that translation is not just given properly, but detailed. And I feel that when one government provides an in-kind to another, if the need were to arise for that other agency, that communication through this vehicle could be addressed. And I just think that it's fair, and you know, the good author spoke to you about a recent incident where we were looking for interpreters, and lo and behold, we didn't realize it, that we had experts in that field of translation in our own government, and though it was on a volunteer basis, it really took time away took personal time away from this individual who could have been shared, because this happened during working times. And as I look through the committee reports and share some of the concerns that were brought up through the definitions of interpretation, I would like to know that, you to know, Madam Speaker, that there was a concern about maybe doing adding what the actual term of a qualified foreign language or sign language interpreter should be defined as. And I would like to ask if I could just have a 1-minute recess so that I can talk to the author and look at the definitions and seeing if that would adhere to the intent of Section 4127. It's based on input that was given by DICIT and a couple of other reports that were in here. Okay?
We had to look up some laws, and I think a lot of questions have been answered. So, Senator Munya Barnes, you still have the floor. Senators, please take your discussions outside. Thank you.
Situas Masi, Madam Speaker, and I really want to thank you for giving me the time and the opportunity to speak to the sponsor of the legislation, Senator Tony Atta, because some of the concerns that came up, and as we were discussing and looking up laws to make sure that everything was in place, they've been addressed. So I just want to thank the good sponsor, I want to say from Sinahanya, right? Sinahanya, or Afami, to say thank you for letting me be his co-sponsor on this. We were at the public hearing. We received testimony and written testimony in reference to this. We've talked about the issues, and it's a good bill. And this is, again, Madam Speaker, the time to say we are one government of Guam, and sometimes we have to pull on the expertise within our government to help out, especially when there is what they would say a communication gap. And we have the experts in our own arena. Let's tap into that. Let's recognize that. But give them the opportunity that if they're going to represent us and making sure that expertise is utilized, then let's not charge them for using their expertise to help our government, whether it be in the legislative branch, executive branch, and judicial branch. If there's an expert in this legislative body that is going to be needed to tap into because something needs to be done, then let's share. And that's what I've always been about. It's about partnering. It's about working together. It's about sharing. And sometimes we don't have to charge or get charged for things that we can do when we can share within our government. So thank you, and thank you, Senator Tony Atta. And I hope I ask my colleagues to please support this good legislation because it is a good piece of legislation. Situas Masi.
Thank you very much, Senator Munya Barnes. Senator Tom Atta on the motion. Cancel. Okay. Is there anybody else who would like to speak on the motion? Senator Atta, Tony, would you like to close?
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'd like to thank my colleagues for the healthy discussion that we have concerning the bill. I think everything has been addressed, and hopefully we can, with the support of my colleagues here, that we'll be able to get this bill moved forward. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
You're welcome. So on the motion then to place Bill 58 to the third reading file without any objections, so ordered. The next bill on the agenda is Bill number 9, and I recognize the author, Senator Guthertz.
Good morning, Madam Speaker. How are you today?
Good morning, my dear. Thank you.
Very good. And colleagues, good morning. It is my pleasure to move that Bill 9 be placed in reading today, third reading for discussion purposes, Madam Speaker.
Yes, you may continue.
Thank you, my Speaker. Madam Speaker, Bill 9 is an act to amend Section 34205 of Chapter 34, Title 10 Guam Code Annotated, and Section 70-10 of Chapter 70, Title 9, Guam Code Annotated, and to add Section 70.10.1, 70.10.2, and 70.10.3 to Chapter 70, Title 9, Guam Code Annotated, relative to keeping animals in Guam. This measure was well received during the public hearing on January 25th, 2011, with overwhelming testimony from the public and also from our four-legged friends that actually attended the hearing. We had about 100 people in the hearing room, Madam Speaker, that day. There was no testimony presented against the bill. The Guam animals in need not-for-profit organization, as all of us know, has been operating the government-owned animal shelter in Jigo for a number of years now. In developing this bill, I worked with groups such as GAIN and individuals associated with other animal organizations, as well as citizens in general, to try to put forward a bill that would address some of the current issues with reference to the keeping of animals in Guam and issues of animal cruelty. All of you know me to be an advocate for our four-legged friends, but I'm also an advocate for the proper treatment of animals. And I was happy to forward the cause of this bill to begin the necessary dialogue to ensure that when we commit to keeping a domestic pet, we are ready to properly care for them. In reviewing our current laws, I found that current statutes pertaining to animal cruelty and care are extremely antiquated on Guam. The statutes currently provide little deterrence for persons that intentionally inflict physical and serious injury upon animals through negligence and intentional acts of cruelty. In some instances, Madam Speaker, owners fail to provide even the most basic of care for animals in their person. And as an island community, we know that we have witnessed instances where animals have suffered a cruel death or near death from starvation, thirst, or were injured or killed through deliberate acts of cruelty. We saw some of this with the famous nefarious Greyhound episode that occurred in our island about a year ago. It really is time to strengthen our laws and punishments against the perpetuators of cruelty to animals and address persons whose actions fall outside legitimate and legally sanctioned conduct, and who intentionally, negligently, and with criminal negligence inflict harm on animals. The measure simply outlines the basic tenets of good care of animals, such as making sure there is adequate space for them to move around in, an area which is reasonably clean, which otherwise would be injurious to the health of the animals and their human counterparts, and to emphasize humane care and treatment of animals to preserve the health and well-being of them and their owners as well. Section 3 of the bill sets up more up-to-date definitions for the animals, their care and treatment. Section 4 upgrades the animal criminal action and defines the cruelty to animals code. Exceptions and proposed penalties are also included. Section 5 and Section 6 of the bill adds a new section to our criminal code called animal abuse in the first degree and animal abandonment. Section 7 deals with the authority to enter premises and court proceedings when it is found that there may be a case of animal abuse and neglect. During the hearing, Madam Speaker, a number of individuals attended and brought with them photographic illustrations of the kinds of cruelty, intentional cruelty and physical abuse of animals that, and these are domestic animals that we have seen on our island quite recently, as a matter of fact. And if you wish to see some of these animals yourself, it's very easy to do that. You just go visit the Gain Shelter and you will see the animals that they've taken in to try to help who've been cruelly treated. In some cases, they have no choice but to euthanize these animals because they're too far gone. In other cases, they try to rehabilitate them and get them adopted out to give them a chance at life. But I think at this point in time, particularly with the anticipated increase in Guam's population for the military buildup over the next 10 years, that we need to strengthen our current laws dealing with animals and animal cruelty, and make sure that we are at par in as much as possible with the practices that have been put in place in other jurisdictions. So I offer this bill to my colleagues, and I ask for your consideration. Amendments would be welcome. If you think you would like to offer amendments to help the bill or approve upon it, be happy to receive those amendments. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Thank you very much, Senator Guthrie. On the motion, recognize Senator Blas on the motion.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Good morning to everybody. Madam Speaker, while I do rise in support of the intent of the legislation, recognizing, yes, that you intend to have pets, you intend to keep animals, you got to recognize there's some there's the point that you've got to take the responsibility of being able to care for these animals and not treat them cruelly, and not necessarily even treat them as, for lack of a better term, test cases or experiments for that matter. But that said, Madam Speaker, and recognizing with regards to I appreciate that there are parameters that are set in as far as what should constitute proper animal care and decent animal care. I'm a little bit concerned with regards to the broadness of some of the definitions that we have here, and two in particular. One is actually found on I guess this is page 2. Line 4, where it basically says adequate space to exercise. Now, I say this because if you look further into the bill, of which I have another issue with, is with regards to the authority of those individuals responsible for the enforcement of this law, the broad authority that they have to be able to investigate these matters. I believe and I feel that when you say adequate space to exercise, that opens it up to interpretation. What is adequate? What may be an adequate space for the good author's Chihuahua may not be the same adequate space for a Rottweiler, or vice versa. And so, just that word there, recognizing, okay, there need to be a space to exercise, but I think that the word adequate may be interpreted in a number of different ways. That leads to, again, a concern that I have with regards to Section 7, and I'll get to that when I get to that. And so, and the offer of the good author to make this a better bill, and so that it doesn't leave that up to interpretation. It recognizes that there has to be space for exercise. Now, what that space for exercise, is it adequate or not? That's an arguable point. But that shouldn't be as a result of somebody's interpretation to develop a probable cause to enter into the premises. Madam Speaker, with that, I offer to amend and to strike the word adequate on page 2, line 4.
So on page 3.
Page 3 to page 2.
Well,
page
you have your page.
Page 2.
Page 2. Which
Line
amendment?
4.
I only have one amendment. And it says here on line 28 of page 3.
No, ma'am, that's not my amendment.
That's not your amendment?
I'm Senator
That's
Bloss,
true.
ma'am.
There's no name. That's right. This is no name. So can I have a copy, please, of the amendment?
No, there was,
Oh, you're not passing it
it's a
around?
simple, just one strike word, ma'am.
Oh, one word.
Okay,
Okay.
unless
wait,
you want me to,
and there are no pages here.
You
So
want me to
what
cut down a
section?
tree and...
What section again, Senator?
It's page 2, line 4 under section 34205, animal care.
Okay.
Line 4,
Line 4,
it says adequate space to exercise, strike, delete the word adequate.
adequate. Okay, so on that amendment, without any objections, so ordered. You still have the floor, Senator.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Madam Speaker, on that same page, actually, if you go down to line 26, it says access to a enclosed structure. How do you define an enclosed structure? And how do you define the structure? You know, some individuals will define an enclosed structure as basically having 4 walls with a simple entrance. You know, concrete roof in some cases, kennel-like. Some would describe it as basically having, you know, basically 3 sides or 2 sides to be able to guard it from the wind and rain. What is an enclosed structure here? Again, it's subject to an interpretation that an individual who has the authority to enter and to develop probable cause can interpret liberally, so much so that then there could be some suggestion in it. And so,
No, the one in the committee, with the committee report, Bill 9. Can you please, Sergeant at Arms, can you get a copy of the committee report to the senator?
and so, ma'am, I would prefer that we take out the word enclosed, because then structure is sufficient to protect the animal from wind.
Okay, so on the amendment to strike out enclose without any objection. There is the same bill, it's not an amended, a substituted bill, so it's the same bill that you have. It's on page 2, line 26, the second page. It doesn't have a page number in the bottom. Line 26, yeah, the second page then, which is section 3. To strike and close. Are you with us? You found it? Okay. So on that amendment then, without any objections, so ordered. Senator, you still have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Madam Speaker, my last and most major concern is it's actually on the last page. And it deals with Section 7, authority to enter premises in court proceedings. A, if there is a probable cause to believe that an animal is being subjected to treatment in violation of Section 70, and in the words of my sister from yada, 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 of this chapter, any officer may enter the premises to impound the animals or animals. Madam Speaker, the issue that I have here, ma'am, is in most other cases, the standard of basically to be able to enter into the individual's property legally, yes, you need to establish, and there has to be probable cause. But the next step to that, ma'am, is that after developing that probable cause, you must basically obtain a search warrant. What this will basically provide is an individual, based on their interpretation, setting the probable cause or saying that they have probable cause without an independent source as the judicial branch to be able to verify and to authenticate and to provide that level of comfort, if you will, that probable cause has been met. In all other cases, it requires a search warrant. Here, it basically says an individual, upon establishing probable cause on himself or herself for that matter, has the authority to enter into your property. And I will tell you, Madam Speaker, as a former law enforcement officer, there have been many times that I've worked with other law enforcement entities that have the authority to be able to enter, and using that as a tool to be able to continue and to further an investigation. Is it illegal? Probably not, because I'm entering under the guise of a different authority. But is it right? And I think what we have to do is we've got to basically protect an individual. I mean, again, the law or the bill here as proposed sets parameters. But even with the earlier amendments that I made, it still sets so that an individual, it's broad enough so that the individual can interpret it and develop his or her own probable cause, therefore leading an individual not to be able to enter your property without a search warrant. And without wanting to be long-winded about this whole thing, ma'am, because of my concern with this, my amendment is basically to strike out Section 7, all of Section 7. That's in the last page, starting from line 6 through line 16.
On the amendment, Senator Guthrie, you're recognized.
However, I would be pleased to accept an amendment that would insert the requirement for a court authorization to undertake this action. I wouldn't object to that, but I would object to striking the section because this is really at the heart of this issue, to be able to try to rescue animals that are cruelly treated, really cruelly treated, is very, very difficult. And this section of the bill is intended to give the law enforcement community the authority to actually do this with the law behind them. So what I would recommend as an alternative to that amendment, if the mover would consider it, is simply add language that says, would read this way, authority enter premise, etc., that if there is probable cause to believe that any animal is being subjected to treatment in violation of da-da-da-da-da-da-da of this chapter, any officer, law enforcement officer, after obtaining a search warrant from the court, may enter da-da-da-da-da-da-da. I think that would be the better way.
Ma'am, point of order with regards to the proffer. If we're going to subject this, and if this is going to be already part of our criminal procedures, that is already a remedy that is already offered. It is already there. If there is probable cause to believe that a crime is committed. Okay?
Madam Speaker, the problem
So it's there already.
Well, it's not clear to the community that it applies to issues of animal cruelty. That's the problem. So we're making it very clear, very, very clear, that individuals that engage in this behavior could face law enforcement intervention. And I think it's actually a good idea to have the added search warrant as part of this, to be a requirement of this action if it were to occur. But to eliminate the section would just totally weaken this bill and make it as bad as it is now, frankly.
Senators,
laws are
we're
now.
going to take a brief recess.
Yeah.
Back in session. Senator Guthertz, we're going to have to deal with the motion to delete first, and if it fails, then you can proceed with your amendment. So is there anyone who would like to speak on the motion then to delete the entire section 7? No one wants to discuss it. And there's an objection then from Senator Guthertz. I'm going to call for the vote. So those in favor then of the motion to delete section 7 on the last page of the bill, please raise your hand. Motion to delete. Okay, failed. So Senator Guthers, then on your motion.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. In order to accommodate the concern of my colleague, and I think it's a really good idea, to be honest with you, I would insert, Madam Speaker, very simple language that would say, on line 10, where it says, any officer, comma, after obtaining a legal search warrant, comma, may enter the premises, da 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 da. So the only change would be to add the language, after obtaining a legal search warrant.
Okay, on the amendment, Senator Palacios, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise in support of the amendment. Any time that you have a search warrant, it is preceded, of course, by petition to the court. And therefore, then with the search warrant, then you have the approval of the court. Considering on page, especially in light of the definition of officer on line 6 of, I think, this is not page, but I think, the definition of officer only says that officer means a member of the Guam Police Department, a mayor of Guam, an animal control officer, or any other person authorized by law, authorized by the chief of police, or authorized by the director of administration, agriculture. Now, the implication of some orientation or training requirement with respect to determining what is probable cause and at what stage, it is even more important that a search warrant be obtained. Anytime that you obtain a search warrant, then you have to convince the court to issue that. Therefore, having obtained the search warrant, it shows the approval of the court that then an officer may enter. It does not then at that point question the training or the training of the officer that's entering. Once the officer is equipped with the search warrant, that is sufficient. And I think that then would have the protection of the privacy of the property owner, and at the same time the protection of the officer entering the property. And for this, I support the amendment, Madam Speaker. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Palacios. On the amendment, Senator Frank Blas, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I appreciate with regards to getting a search warrant, and again, it's to protect, again, the individual's rights and liberties. Albeit, in a court of justice, you're innocent until proven guilty. I just want to forewarn many of my clients here that included in this whole definition of probable cause is this definition called exigent circumstance. Okay? Exigent circumstance is basically when you have reason to believe and probable cause to believe. Here, probable cause to believe that an exigent circumstance exists, and that it is imperative that the individuals that there's intervention by an individual. Now what we're saying is because exigent circumstance, there's probable cause that must exist with exigent circumstance. Now what we're saying is now we've also provided that even in exigent circumstances, you need a search warrant. In my earlier argument, ma'am, one of the things that I had basic concern is in creation of this statute, legislation statute, it falls under the criminal proceedings. So if there was the probable cause to believe, and there is no exigent circumstances, then you get a warrant to protect the civil liberties of an individual. My concern here now is then the requirement there may be that requirement in the instances of exigent circumstances to again put the standard of a search warrant. delaying an individual's response, timely response, by as much as 2 to 3 hours. And so I can appreciate, and what I can appreciate here, the concern that I've got now is that the standard that we're setting here may have an unintended consequence and an effect on other statutes that we have. Thank you very much.
Okay, Senator, the Vice Speaker, you're recognized on the motion.
Madam Speaker, I rise in support of the position that's been taken by Senator Blas. I really do think that we probably would have been easier if we had just struck Section 7 and allowed criminal procedure to handle it. Because if you have an animal that hasn't been fed in 5 days, the additional 3 hours to go to get a judge to give you a search warrant to go in and check to see whether or not that animal has been fed in 5 days will occur. They'll be able to have time. The exigent circumstances that Senator Blas is talking about is in the event that you know that there's a dog fight going on, to have to run back downtown to try to get a search warrant. By the time you're done, the fight will be over and there'll be 5 or 6 dogs dead in a pit. Leave the criminal procedure law to run its course and just allow it to go. You've already outlawed it, you're providing the protections. Don't compound the problem.
On the motion, on the amendment rather, Senator Ada, you're recognized. Tony Ada.
Yes, Madam Speaker, if the author of the amendment will yield to a question. My question is, does the mayor or animal control officer or the director for the Department of Agriculture have the authority to request for a warrant?
Senator, do you yield to the question?
Well, they are peace officers, yes. The animal control officers are peace officers under Guam law. They're trained as peace officers.
And how about the director of the Department
The
of
director is the head of the department, and he can sign off on the request as part of the request.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Okay. On the amendment, are there any other members who would like to discuss the amendment? Okay, so I'm going, Senator Gutherds, would you like to do a closing on your amendment?
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Speaker. You know, I think it's very obvious to me that we're sort of moving in a new area with respect to the intent of this bill. And I understand the concerns of my colleagues. I thought the idea of the search warrant is very good because it gives the empowerment to the officers. It says the government is behind them. It also gives meaning to item number 2 under the same section, which says that, or item number 1, that an officer is not liable for any damages for an entry under subsection A of this section unless the damages were caused by reckless behavior. So with the search warrant, that reinforces number 1 in this section. And, you know, you talk about delay, that this would make it take longer. Yeah, the search warrant would make things longer. Well, earlier in the discussion, it was emphasized that it needs to be more legal support for this kind of an action. And that's why the search warrant was recommended, and that's why I did not object to it. I believe that if this whole section is removed, it will defeat the purpose of this bill in 2 ways. One of the problems.
State your point.
Point of information, ma'am.
Yes.
And just, you know, just so that it can help to appease the good author. I recognize and I thank her for wanting to protect the officers. In the legal execution, ma'am, in the legal execution of your duties, you are protected. I will give you 2 instances, okay? Personally, I know this because it happened to me. In the execution of the search warrant, sometimes they're not going to open the door when you knock. You're going to have to break the door down. Okay? And in many occasions, I've either had to or had to given the authority to break the door down. Is there damages caused? Yes. Is the officer liable for those damages? No, because it's in the legal. They're doing this legally and in performance of their duty. In an exigent circumstance, there was an instance where there was very good reason to believe that a child was being abused. In order to gain entry into a house, I had to throw a cinder block through a glass window. Was I covered? Yes. Because it was in the execution of my legal responsibility, my legal duties.
Okay.
So if the officers or the individuals who are performing their duties do this in a legal manner and doing consistent with it, okay, they are covered. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that information. Senator Guthrie.
Yes, well, from what I'm hearing here is that maybe we don't need the search warrant after all. And maybe I should withdraw that amendment to have the search warrant language included and simply replace it, say, emphasize under very exigency circumstances that the officer shall have the authority to,
So,
rather than mentioning search warrant.
So Senator Guthrie, so I
Yes.
need to understand, so are you going to withdraw then your amendment?
Okay, I'll withdraw my amendment. That
Okay,
would
so let's take care of that first.
All
So
right.
there's a
it
motion then
wasn't
to withdraw.
It wasn't seconded, I don't think.
No, it doesn't need to be. So
Oh.
there's an amendment then to withdraw her amendment. Are there any objections? No objections to order. Now, Senator Guthrie, you want to offer a different amendment.
Yes, very simple.
So do you need a minute then to prepare that?
Well, I can do it verbally, it's only 3 words.
Okay, so
All right, thank
what
you.
are the 3 words then?
Removing the language after obtaining a legal search warrant, take that away and simply replace it with any officer. Yeah, I withdrew that, the search warrant.
Yes.
So the language would be any officer under exigency reasons, comma, may enter da 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 da.
Why don't we take a brief recess? The legislature is back in session. Senator Guthrie, to understand you have your amendment.
Yes, the amendment is very simple, Madam Speaker. After the word officer, comma, insert under exigent circumstances, EXI, G-E-N-T, yeah, EXI, G-E-N-T.
Under exigent
Circumstances, comma.
circumstances, comma.
Yeah, then everything else stays the same.
Okay.
Thank you.
On the new amendment by Senator Guthrie, it's adding the words after officer on line 10 under exigent circumstances, and then it continues, may enter the premise. So on the amendment, is there any discussion? No discussion? Any objection? No objections? So ordered. Thank you very much. Okay, on the motion, are there any other speakers on the bill? Senator Mabini, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise in support of Bill 931, and I commend Senator Guthrie for submitting the bill. And for those of us who were at the public hearing, I think it was very clear that our community wants us to send a strong message about our standards of care that we would like for our animals. There are some amendments that I'd like to present, and I believe everybody should have a copy of this. I'll enter just the first 2. The first amendment is in reference to section 7.10b. This is on line 28 of page 3, where it says Class A misdemeanor. And I think this is just a minor oversight. I believe there's no Class A misdemeanor on Guam, so if that could just be changed to misdemeanor.
So delete then Class A.
Yes, Class A misdemeanor.
So on line 28, page 3, delete the words Class A. And you
Yes.
just read that it would be the second degree is a misdemeanor.
That's correct.
On that amendment, any objections? No objections, so ordered. Thank you, Senator. You have another amendment?
Yes, second amendment is on page line 5 of page 5,
Okay.
section 7.10.2A. Class B misdemeanor, also, again, probably a slight oversight that there's no Class B misdemeanor on Guam, and if that could just be replaced with petty misdemeanor.
So on page 5, line 5, delete the words Class B and replace with petty. So it would read, animal abandonment is a petty misdemeanor. On that amendment, no objections on the amendment, so ordered. Okay, Senator, you still have the floor.
Excuse me, and another amendment, line 26 of page 3.
The only problem is we don't have it. Is that an easy
Excuse
one?
me,
I don't
line
have a
26,
copy.
page 3. I'm sorry.
Pat, Pat, are those the amendments over there?
Copy.
Pat.
Yeah. I gave this, this is the one I think was sitting on my desk. This is some copy. Oh, yeah, there's 5.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
So which one are you using first?
This is regarding section 70.10A3 of 70 GCA in line 26, page 3.
Okay, that one first. Page 3.
Okay. Page 3, if it could be changed to kills, comma, adding the word impounds or injures any animal belonging to another without legal strikeout privilege.
Well, wait
Sorry.
one second, because that's a deleted. When it's a
Oh, sorry,
strikeout,
sorry.
so that means
With legal authority, excuse me, adding authority of.
no. Lines 26 and 27 on page 3 has been crossed out. That means it's been deleted, so that does not exist. And it is recommended here as part of the bill.
Right, I know, so, but it's not on the statute right now.
No, I realize that, but you can't unless you're making an amendment to bring back that line with a, to add
That's right.
to add a new.
That's right, we're adding it. We just add it.
So then,
maybe-
okay, so should be added then.
That's
You want to
correct. I'm
add
sorry.
a.
Added,
You want to add
number
a
3.
3.
Kills, comma, impounds or injures any animal belonging to another without legal authority or consent of the owner. Apologize, I didn't have a hard copy. I'm looking at my electronic copy on the screen.
Okay, so on page
Section
3,
3.
lines 26 and 27 that was stricken out, you want to bring back a new 3 that would read kills, comma, impounds or injures any animal belonging to another without legal authority or consent of the owner. Is that correct?
That's correct.
On the amendment, Senator Munya Barnes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I just probably want to try and understand if the author could yield to a question, not the author of the amendment, but the author of the legislation based on this. Because Senator Mabini is trying to reintroduce and keep line item 3 in there based on the present statute today, am I correct?
Yes, but with a new
Right.
language.
So I want to ask the author the intent of removing it to begin with.
It was an error.
Senator Gutherz,
Yeah,
you yield to the
that
question?
deletion was an error, I'm sorry, in the construction of the bill. So I think the addition, returning it is a good thing, with a slight change is a good thing. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Senator Gutherz.
Okay, Senator, so on the amendment, the Mabini amendment, any discussion? Any objections? No objections, and so ordered.
Madam Speaker, I have another amendment. And this is in regards to section 70.10 C of 70 GCA on line 11 of page 4. If we could add 3 new exceptions to include number 4, measures necessary to avert harm by an animal that poses a present and immediate danger to the safety of people or other animals. I think we should add the word of, to the safety of people or other animals. Number 5, the humane killing of animals for food. And number 6, the proper disinfection of rodents, insects, and arachnids.
Okay, on the Mabini amendment to add subsections 4, 5, and 6 on page 4 after line 11. Any discussion? Senator Munya-Barnes?
Can I ask, Madam Speaker, if I could just have a 10-second recess? I just want to be able to ask one, look at item number 5, and maybe ask legal counsel for clarity on this, please.
Okay, brief
Please.
recess. Senator Barnes, you do still have the floor.
Thanks, Itus Masi, Madam Speaker, for giving me the opportunity again. As we talked in recess to our colleagues in reference to this line item 5, I am very hopeful that, well, you know what, let me just do this. Delete the word humane from line item 5, and it would read, the killing of animals for food. You can add to that. So my amendment to the amendment would be...
Which is the, yeah, please read.
My amendment to Senator Mabini's amendment would be on line item 5, would change it to the killing of animals for food. And that would be my amendment.
So it's the killing, not the slaughter. Okay, on the amendment, then, to the amendment, is on sub-item number 5, to delete humane and put the killing of animals for food. Any
That would be the
discussion?
exception.
Yes,
So
it's an exception
Right.
for food. Any discussion? No objections, then so ordered. Senator Babidi, you mentioned something about on line 4, but it didn't go as an amendment. You didn't proffer it as an amendment to one of the words?
Yes, instead of, and as Senator Tina Munoz Barnes had mentioned, changing, she changed it to removing the word humane and leaving killing, perhaps.
Oh, no.
Which what are we talking
Sub-item
about?
4.
Oh, okay. Measures necessary to avert harm by an animal that poses a present and immediate danger to the safety of people, adding the word of, people or other animals.
Off,
Yeah.
the safety off. So to add the word off,
right before-
between safety and people, so read to the safety of people or other animals. On that
yes.
amendment, without any objections, so ordered.
Okay.
So on the amendment that has been amended, are there any objections or any discussions? None, so no objections, so ordered. Okay, I understand, Senator Mabini, you also have another amendment, one more amendment.
Yes, now this is similar to the one previous, it's just a different section. On line 29 of page 4. Oh, excuse me.
Page 5?
Line 29 of page 4.
Oh, it's page 29, okay,
It was the same
29 of page
language.
4.
So basically, making it identical to the previous amendment, adding items number 4, 5, and 6. Line 29, page 4.
Yes, we have an identical language, I mean.
That's correct. That's correct.
What-
So again, it'll be item number 4, measures necessary to avert harm by an animal that poses a present and immediate danger to the safety of people or other animals. Item 5, the killing of animals for food. And item 6, the proper disinfection of rodents, insects, and arachnids.
Oh, but that's the same thing.
Yes, it's the same thing, just a different section of the...
Oh, but a different section of the bill? Let me
That's
s-
correct.
So line
Sections-
29
of page 4,
of page 4.
that was section 70.10.1C.
Okay, so no, it's after, yeah, you're right. So then it would be after 3, after 28, to add the other sections, 4, 5, and 6. Okay, so on that amendment then, without any objections, so ordered.
I have one more amendment, but it probably will pose some discussions or invite some discussions. This is related to a previous motion for amendments on line 9 of page 5, 70.10.3. And I have an amendment, a suggestion to change the language to be replaced with the following.
Yes,
Okay,
we
so we
did.
can-
So you're right.
Okay,
Unless,
not needed? All right, so again, I withdraw
okay.
that amendment request.
Okay, you still have the floor, so you may continue to speak.
Well, yes, anyway, so I appreciate again Senator Gutherds for this bill. I know there are many constituents who are excited that we have finally a bill that will address some growing concerns that we have in our community regarding the humane treatment of animals. We had a great public hearing a few weeks ago, and we had a packed house, and I think our children, and this is an educational opportunity for everybody, so to hear a bill like this, and I'm excited to have our community benefit from the bill, as well as, of course, our animals. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome, Senator Mabini. On the motion, are there anybody else who would like to speak on it? Okay, so I'd like to go ahead and ask the author if you'd like to close.
Really brief, Madam Speaker. I just want to thank my colleagues for their patience on the bill, and I hope they'll support it. It's an important statement from us as a community, how we handle all living things on our island. And I'm sure if this bill becomes law that it will represent our island well. Thank you very much.
So on the motion then to send bill number 9 as amended to the third reading file without any objections, so ordered. The Vice Speaker, where is he? So he's not here. Okay, so it. Okay, all right then, so substitute bill number 44. So I recognize then the second co-sponsor, Senator Respicio, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I move that bill number 44-31, as substituted by the Committee on Rules, Natural and Human Resources, and Federal Foreign and Micronesian Affairs, be accepted for placement of the third reading file with some discussion.
Okay, so would you like to discuss it?
Yes.
Okay, you may proceed.
I believe we have to discuss everything, Madam Speaker.
Okay.
Madam Speaker, Bill 44-31, as we know, would prohibit the sale, trading, or distribution of shark fins, rays, and ray parts by amending certain provisions of our statute. We know that this has been introduced by the Vice Speaker B.J. Cruz and myself as co-sponsor. And in the course of introducing this legislation, we understand that it comes off of the heels of what Palau has done to create a sanctuary for sharks, what the CNMI has done, and I'd like to recognize very quickly Representative Diego Beneventi and thank him for being here in the lobby to monitor the discussions, but primarily also what was done recently in Hawaii with Senator He, where they had this kind of a similar undertaking. And what the sponsor of this bill is intending to do is to close any loophole or any opportunity from our region to have the shark finning done here in our waters on Guam. When the bill was first introduced, Madam Speaker, I want to publicly state for the record, in no way, shape, or form did this target our local fishermen. Nowhere in the bill said that shark finning is currently happening on Guam and our waters off of Guam, so we have to do something immediately. Unfortunately, as we all know, that sometimes we become victims of circumstance by way of how these things are being presented to the different constituencies. I also want to say that Senator Pangilinan, together with Senator Dueñas and I, attended a meeting at the Fishermen's Co-op to try to explain to the fishermen that this bill does not target them. We understand that shark finning is not happening, and so why all the objections? And the objections they raised, Madam Speaker, were all valid. They wanted to make it perfectly clear that they weren't targeted by this bill, and they wanted to make it perfectly clear that some amendments needed to be made in order to make the bill stronger. And I'm happy to report, as the chairman who was able to navigate us through these very, very troubled waters, was that all those amendments, with the exception of a few, were taken into consideration. Madam Speaker, the whole idea behind this bill is for the people of Guam to recognize the importance sharks have to our ecosystem. They're natural-born predators. We know that if you were to take the sharks out of the equation, it'll have cascading effects to where even plant life in our marine oceans would be devastated, and you just have to understand that whole dynamic to recognize just how important sharks are in that system. And so that's what Bill 44 was all about. We even had the benefit of having Rob Stewart come to Guam after going up to CNMI and witnessing Governor Benigno Fitiel sign the legislation that Representative Diego introduced. We had Rob Stewart be able to go to Simon Sanchez High School and to engage that school community to say that since their mascot is the shark, then certainly they want to save the shark. And Simon Sanchez has a very effective club or organization there, Shark Made, Madam Speaker, and they're doing this in their own way. We know that the George Washington High School community through teacher Linda Tetro are doing this in their own way. And so there's various groups out there that are trying to create this public awareness of how important sharks are. Contrary to what we've seen in documentaries through Jack Cousteau and others, where they portray sharks as just beasts of the ocean life, and they just want to not have them there. Our hearing here at the legislature, as you know, was several hours. We received a lot of testimony from students. We've received a lot of testimony from the various fishermen that expressed those concerns that I just articulated. The committee report, Madam Speaker, is extremely thick, and I'd like to also recognize my staff for all the work they put into preparing this. I want to say that we've received over 14,000 petitions. There's an online petition where people asked the legislature, although granted they're not, some were from Guam, but most were from the international community. So there's also a movement throughout the international community to do something like this. I believe if Guam moves forward with this bill, we could be the third area worldwide to want to move toward this effort. So I have a couple amendments. As you know, the bill provides for its findings in Section 1. Section 2 also includes ray as they're a direct cousin of the shark. Section 3 is shark fins, and this is where it provides the prohibition. But the Vice Speaker in his bill has provided that there be 90 days reprieve, so for the sale of shark fins for a period of 90 days after the enactment of this act. So any local restaurant right now who has shark fins in their inventory would have up to 90 days to be able to do that. And this is similar to what they've done in the CNMI. Also what they've done in the CNMI, Madam Speaker, is they allowed for the consumption of sharks for personal consumption. And that was the distinction, and we actually have increased this from a misdemeanor to a felony, and so there's certainly teeth behind this bill. My first amendment, and I passed out a copy, on Section 2, Item Z, I would just move to delete the words raw or dried fin or tail. I don't want to provide any legal loophole for any individual who's caught with shark fins. So if this were to say, for the purposes of this act, as the raw or dried fin or tail of a shark, we don't want any ambiguity. So by deleting the words raw or dried, in that particular section, we're perfectly clear what we're attempting to do here. So that I offer that as my first amendment.
So on page 3, section 2, lines 3 and 4 is to delete the words raw or dried. Is there anyone who would like to discuss it on the amendment? No objections? So ordered.
My other amendment just deletes the word or 2 times because it's not necessary, then adds in the word per violation so that it's clear. So it's any person violating, and then it outlines all these sections, takes out that word or, takes out the other word or, of this article is guilty of a felony punishable by imprisonment of not more than 5 years or by a fine of not less than $500, no more than $5,000, or by both per violation.
So on page then 5, is to delete, then you're right, or, so 307. Okay, on that amendment, without any objections, so ordered.
Madam Speaker, my next amendment really is something that I'm moving on the floor with great trepidation. Believe me, it's been very difficult and challenging, as you know, to try to deal with a certain individual I won't name, but maybe I will soon, because he means well. He just has a passion for his area, and I'm talking about the president of the Fishermen's Co-op, Mr. Manny Duenas, who has been on top of the issue, and who even the proponents of this measure recognize that several amendments he proposed actually made the bill stronger. And so in trying to mediate the two sides and trying to find a win-win to where we're accomplishing the objective of the sponsor of the bill, Madam Speaker, but we're not diluting the bill at all. And so I think we've gone to this point where the only concern that Mr. Duenas and Mr. Tom Camacho and others are put forward is, and they want to include in this bill, is to prevent chumming. Chumming, as we know, is shark feeding. And while it was discussed at the public hearing, not at great length, but it was brought up at the public hearing, the best I can do, Madam Speaker, is just offer this as a floor amendment. But I caution my good colleagues that something like this should really be the subject of a standalone bill. Something like this requires more public discussion because we didn't really discuss this at our public hearing. But as a matter of showing good faith to that constituency, I said the best I can do is offer it as a floor amendment and just have the body decide. But I would ask that we proceed with caution. If we wanted to include this in the bill, it would be fine, but I expressed some concerns in so doing. And so that amendment has been offered.
We're going to have to take each amendment separately because they're.
Yeah, but if we include if we want to include shark feeding in this legislation, then it changes the legislative intent. So that's section 1. Then it says shark feeding prohibited. That's the other area that we had to amend. Then we also had to include it as a penalty. So just as a matter of to say to the body so we can all follow along, there are 3 amendments, and I explained what they were, Madam Speaker. And so we just have to decide if we want to include this in the bill or if we rather address it by other
But I think
means.
that if we deal with the legislative intent which speaks of shark feeding, then if it fails, then the other amendments would not.
I agree.
So we really should then just do the first, which is the legislative intent, and I recognize the Vice Speaker.
Madam Speaker, as the years go by and I'm in this legislature, I recognize the wisdom of Senator Klitsky's admonition about not including legislative intent in bills. It just people get caught up in this whole thing. It would be so much easier if we just strike section 1 on the legislative intent.
Okay,
Then that way we don't have to, what was said and who's saying what about who. Let the intent of the legislation be the discussion on this floor and not what I or one of my staffers writes as the legislative intent to try to sell this bill, because then everybody gets their axle caught around that. And they just get all upset because you said something, and it just seems to me it would be just easier if we just struck the whole legislative intent. There are 2 lines in here that are most important, and that's the prohibitions.
So, Madam Speaker, before we proceed with this discussion, I will withdraw my motion if that's what the Vice Speaker is moving. But just to be clear, I didn't write the bill, and the original bill has a legislative intent. So we just can't come to session and argue that we shouldn't be doing this, we shouldn't be doing that, when originally the bill had a legislative intent. So my proposal to add this legislative intent would include the activity of shark feeding. I'm not proposing that we had We have a legislative intent. As a matter of fact, it's because of the legislative intent that caused the fishermen to misunderstand what our intent was. And so I was saying that the legislative intent does not have any full force and effect of law, so we should just delete it. But that was not what was desired at the time, so I just have to make best with what we have, Madam Speaker. And so the original bill had a legislative intent, so I agree that we should not be having legislative intent. I'm hoping that the same person that said that, we would see bills coming out of that office with no legislative intent.
So, Senator, then, so, wait a minute, because I heard what you're saying. So, are you then going to change then your amendment now to not then include the legislative intent?
Yeah, I would
Just
agree with the
to
good
delete-
Vice Speaker's advice and just strike out the legislative intent.
Okay, so you're going to withdraw, though, your first amendment,
I
which
do.
is, okay, so we would, without any objection, the first amendment then is withdrawn to replace it with a new legislative intent. Without any objections? No? No, but I'm going back to... No, but first of all, he agrees to that, but we need to take care of his amendment to withdraw it and then go back then to offer another amendment, which is to delete. That's my understanding. No. What? Because he's offering an amendment with a new legislative intent.
That includes shark feeding.
Yes. So that's what it is. So he's making a motion to now delete.
Withdraw my amendment.
Withdraw his amendment of the new legislative
Yeah.
intent.
And then the Vice Speaker has
And
offered
you're
an
right.
motion to delete the intent from the
So we need to take care.
substituted bill.
You're right. So we'll
Yeah.
take care of Senator Respicio's amendment and was now to withdraw. Yes. We're breaking it up to three parts. We're only in the legislative intent. So the senator is making a motion now to withdraw, his amendment. So, yes, which is section 1. And you want to speak?
And because I have the floor, and so we can follow procedurally, I'm making the motion to delete the legislative intent from the substituted
Okay.
version. So then we can just
there is
discuss
an
that
objection
motion.
then now for you to go back to withdraw then your first amendment to add this new section of legislative intent. Is that where everybody's at? Okay.
I object to withdrawing the
Okay, so I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page.
legislative intent.
The motion is to delete section, the legislative intent. That's the motion.
No, not yet. It's just to withdraw his,
So the first one is just to withdraw his amendment.
yes.
Motion to withdraw what?
Yes. Which is the 4-page.
Right, which is this.
Yes. Okay. Wait. Why don't we just take a brief recess and make this easy? Session, and we'll repeat the senator's amendment, or senator, maybe it would be best if you repeat your motion.
Yeah, Madam Speaker, I have a floor amendment that's presented in 3 parts. I know. So I'm
Yes.
explaining why I'm deleting I move to delete, I would move to withdraw my first amendment, which first moved the first part of this 3-part floor amendment.
Yes, which is section 1, legislative intent.
Yes.
Yes,
So I withdraw
on
that.
that motion then, without any objection, or you would like to speak on the, okay. Senator Pangilinan, you're recognized then.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I certainly don't subscribe to the legislative minimalism of my good colleague in the past, Senator Klitsky, on all instances of legislative intent. I think sometimes it's very important to put legislative intent to offer guidance should the subject matter be subject to controversy, meaning there needs to be an interpretation of exactly why we're doing something. And I think in this case, I certainly support the deletion of the legislative intent because there are members of our community who don't agree with the reasons being put in the legislative intent on why we're doing shark finning. And so what is most important is that we want to ban shark finning. We want to choke off the market for this shark fins, which is a cruel and unusual way of getting something and then discarding the animal and putting it out to sea and leaving it to die in such inhumane manner. And with the legislative intent that was originally here, there are members of our community who felt that that was impugning, ascribing a practice to them as a community of fishermen that they just do not practice. So while the greater community of fishermen in the world practice that, we don't do it. So when we're banning it, we're not doing it because of their actions. We're doing it because of the greater community out there that don't subscribe to the same principles and protections that we want to grant. And so in this case, I certainly, because of the controversy surrounding the language that's being used, there's no need to debate why we're doing it. It's just that we want to do it. And so I stand in support of deleting the legislative intent in this instance. But I just wanted to say that, I think sometimes legislative intent, and most times for me, it's very important so that when controversy arises, we can go back to why we're doing it. I think here we just know we don't want to do shark finning. It's a bad practice. We don't agree with it. And we don't want to ascribe any motivations of why we're doing it to practices that are being done by our local community, because we know they don't do that. They know they don't do that. That's not their intention, and it has never been their practice either. So I support the amendment to delete.
Thank you very much, Senator Maglin. So on the motion then is to delete the first part, which is section 1, the legislative intent. Are there any others who would like to discuss it? Senator Dueñas, you're recognized.
Madam Speaker, while I agree with the removal, it was this legislative intent that as we go forward now and move and work through Senator Respicio's other amendments, we will see why actually it ended up being a good thing, because of the fact that it caused a lot of amendments to be proffered that will make this legislation better. And I will discuss on the amendments and discuss what happened during the public hearing, which was causing and supporting a lot of the incitement of fishermen and those who weren't practicing this to begin with. While the intent is excellent and wonderful, I'm glad this intent actually came out, because that's what drove the discussion and what drove the discussion over at the Guam Fishermen's Co-op to come up with a bill that better reflects what's happening on Guam and what we want to happen on Guam, and not to be demonized like the rest of the world who practices this inhumane process, and something that is something that can delete all fisheries around the world when you take out a predator such as the shark. So I move forward to support this, but it started the discussion, and I'm glad it was in there. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Dueñas. So if there's no other discussion, I would have the mover then of the amendment close.
Thank you very much.
Senator Respicio.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank my colleagues for their presentations on the amendment. For the record, I'm still trying to find where in the original intent did it say that this practice is happening on Guam and that it demonizes the local fishermen. So in deference to the sponsor of the bill, that was not there. But we understand that the legislative process is trying to keep our eye at the end result and what is it we really want here. What we want, as what the Vice Speaker has presented, is we want to ban shark finning within our region. So if it means taking out the intent, but we still meet our objective, then fine. And so that was my point. There are times when the legislative intent is absolutely necessary, but if it's going to be used as a means to incite and spur up all these debate, then I stand before you and before our colleagues and say that's not necessary. Just remove it. Another part of the intent referenced that the shark population there's a depletion of shark population in our waters. Then the fishermen have disputed the science and said, you're absolutely false, that there are a lot of sharks in our waters, just go fishing with us. And so rather than getting into those debates to whether or not the population is actually dwindling, and rather than arguing the science at this point in time, I was even offering that we remove the intent and we just don't have that debate anymore. And so I guess this is, for me, it just reaffirms what we have to do here in the legislature and what we have to do as politicians, and politics being the art of the possible, to remove the legislative intent, removes all of that debate so we can focus on what we really want. And so I rise in support of, obviously, of my amendment to remove the legislative intent, and I thank my colleagues for spending some time in this kind of discourse.
So on that motion then, without any objections, so ordered.
Madam Speaker, the second part of my three-part amendment, which disposes the first part, is really a discussion that I'd like for us to have as a body.
One moment then, because we've withdrawn your intent to which you had wanted to replace
so now
what's
my
in the bill.
motion is to delete section 1.
So then you're right. So then the motion now is
You're
to delete section 1 in the bill, the legislative intent. Any objections? No objections, and so ordered.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, part 2 of this three-part amendment is a kind of discussion that I have no recourse but to bring to the floor for the body to dispose of. It would put into this bill a prohibition against shark feeding. And as we know, this is a practice called chumming, or feeding fish for the purpose of harvesting marine species. And so the fishermen have argued that to kind of feed the sharks in the waters would generate a kind of environment that may not be safe for fishermen. And that's what they argue, and that's what their concern is, for us to put in this bill. Really, although it was discussed briefly at the public hearing, I didn't feel that I had the unilateral authority to just say yes or no, given that we're moving forward on this legislation at this time, and it wouldn't be prudent, in my opinion, to delay this for another 30 days because we're already here. And if you want to follow the email chains between Manny Duenas, Tom Camacho, other members of the Fishermen's Co-op, to include the mayors and vice mayors, I think this is the final area that we can resolve and dispose of before we can really feel that all of their concerns were addressed. And in my opinion, Madam Speaker, this subject area probably should be better addressed as a standalone bill because, like I argued, for the original intent of the bill, and that's to prohibit shark finning here in our region. And so there's a desire to include shark feeding prohibition, and so I leave that to the body to dispose. Thank you.
Senator, just to get a clarification, because in the original bill on page 4, section 5 is a rules and regulations. I want to make sure that we're on the same page here. And shark finning is totally different.
Yeah, it'll add a new section 5, Madam Speaker.
But
Part 2 would add a new section 5, shark feeding prohibited. And then the language continues
So,
on
wait,
page 4.
but we have a section 5. Are you going to delete then the section 5?
Oh, no. Then I guess
Okay, so it's going to add a new section then.
Yeah.
So, all right, so it's not a new section 5, but just to add a new section.
Yeah.
All right. And then renumber. So add a new section and then renumber. Okay, clerks, you were able to get that information then? Okay, so then we are on shark finning, and I have the Vice Speaker then to speak.
Madam Speaker, I rise in support of this amendment in opposition to it. The intent of this bill was to allow nature to be nature, to allow the sharks to go where they're going to go and feed on what their natural feeding source is. To chum the waters and bring them in closer to the shore makes it dangerous for everybody. They should follow their own course where they're supposed to be going and left alone and not be fed whatever it is that they're feeding them. It's unnatural, and I think it defeats what we're trying to do in here. Allow them to be what they are and do what they do, where they do it, and not artificially attract them to different places. So I have no objection to this, this amendment and support it.
Thank you very much. Vice Speaker, on the motion, on the amendment, Senator Duenas, you recognize.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. On the motion of the bill as well as this amendment, I rise in full support of it. And now that we've gotten rid of all of the insightful language, it is also, and this is what the fishermen have expressed over a number of years, is that that's, you know, while the science is being debated, you know, it is the experience of many fishermen as they go fishing that there are a lot of sharks. Now, like I said, the science and the numbers are being debated, but there's no question that when you add fish parts to the water, when you do this to either attract to a dive site, if you do this for other commercial purposes, and be it some sort of tour or whatever it is, that you would artificially, you know, attract sharks to a location. Fishermen have a tough enough time as it is out there, as they testified at the co-op, fending off sharks in Cocos Island and many other lagoons and areas that we fish around Guam. And so I rise in support of this, and this is the kind of input that was being requested for from the beginning. And that's actually what came out also, Madam Speaker, of the conversation and the debate that we had over at the co-op, which Senator Pangilinan and Senator Respicio joined us on. And these were the only kind of things that those folks that were speaking up on these issues that they wanted to include to ensure that the language is supportive of what they want to do, and also does not, you know, they needed to add this section so that these type of activities are not taking place, because there already was a demonization of commercial fishing to begin with. And then other language that was strengthened within this bill to include the issues of what does a local fisherman do with a bycatch, you know, and that was strengthened. So I certainly rise in support of this amendment, Madam Speaker, and I appreciate Senator Respicio, or the gentleman, excuse me, for bringing it forward. Thank you.
You're welcome. Senator Guthertz on the amendment.
Madam Speaker, I support this amendment. Chumming is a very bad practice. In my opinion, it is extremely dangerous, and we want to preempt any potential commercial activities such as shark viewing that exploits these animals through the chumming activity, attracting them to vessels or to cages for people to watch sharks by bloody dead fish is extremely dangerous, and it's inappropriate and unfair to the animals. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Guthertz. On the amendment, Senator Pangilinan, you recognize.
This Masi, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise in support of the amendment. As the good author of the legislation had articulated, this idea of throwing off the balance of the ecological system within the oceans by injecting something artificial that's not part of the normal activity of marine life throws it off balance. And what we're trying to do is keep things in balance. And what you do when you enter into the practice of this practice called chumming and feeding the fish and so forth is that you create you condition the animal to act in a certain way. And believe it or not, you know, you can train a dog to wear a skirt, sit up, and bark, or pants for that matter. But you precondition to the animal to do something that's not in its normal constitution. And so this chumming has the potential, if you're not doing it for a specific purpose except to just bring them to you, and then leave them like that, most especially with the sharks, you build up a concentration of the sharks, and you precondition the sharks to not only now respond to the feeding, but they now, when they hear a boat, as our fishermen tell us, the sharks come because they know the lines are out, they know they're going to hook a fish, and they know that if they follow the boat and follow the sound, they'll find fish. And so when you chum, you build up this concentration of sharks, and it's done for future possible economic exploitation of these animals, as was mentioned. That's why when we say, well, Hawaii banned shark finning, Hawaii also banned the idea of chumming and feeding with the shark. Swimming with the sharks. Because when you do that, it really impacts their other marine activities. When you have sharks now coming, looking to the shore, or looking to the other marine life activity that says, hey, there's something else there. And so, as so well put by the author, it really throws off the balance. It throws off the natural element and the natural environment, and therefore goes contrary to what we're trying to do with the shark finning bill. And so I stand in support of the amendment.
Thank you very much. Is there anybody else who would like to speak on the amendment? There being none, so there are no objections, so ordered. Okay, Senator Respicio, on your third amendment, which is Section 7.
The third part, Madam Speaker, since the second part of this three-part for amendment passed, would establish the penalty. And so I offer that as the third amendment.
Okay, so, and that of course will mean renumbering.
Correct.
Okay, do you want to discuss it? Or you just want to go ahead? Okay. And any discussion then, anybody else? Any objection? Okay, without any objections, so ordered.
Can I ask for a minute recess?
Okay, we're going to take a minute recess. The legislature is back in session. Senator Respicio, you still have the floor.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Speaker. This concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Okay then. On the motion then, or the bill that has been amended, the Vice Speaker, anybody else want to speak? So I can have the Vice, okay, Vice Speaker, I'm going to have you close then, or you want to just speak?
I want to speak, please.
Okay then, so.
Madam Speaker, before I begin, I want to acknowledge the presence of someone who I consider to be a mentor of mine in this area of sustainable fishing and protecting the environment. In our conference room at the present time is the former Lieutenant Governor and member of the Northern Marianas Legislature, Diego Benavente. He has been a fisherman for almost his entire life. He grew up fishing. His father was a fisherman. He ran a fish shop in the Northern Marianas for 17 years. He's come up and down to Guam on numerous of the derbies that occur between Saipan and Guam. And I respect this man for his knowledge. I mean, I admit, I've dove a couple of times or for several years, so I have an appreciation and a love for the water. But this is a man who's devoted his life to the water and understands the water. And he has, in the Northern Marianas, introduced some of the most, to me, far-reaching and revolutionary protective legislation for the marine environment. I hope that in the remaining months of my term that I will be able to emulate and do half of what he's done to protect the marine environment. He came down today to attend session to be here in the event anybody wanted to ask any questions about the fact of the importance of this issue and the fact that the fishing industry would survive. His commitment to this, he, at his own expense, flew down today, Madam Speaker. At his own expense a few weeks ago, actually about 5 weeks ago, he came down again to speak to me about, and to members of the legislature about the introduction of this bill because of his commitment to it. Unfortunately, while he was down here, they staged an interesting little coup in the Northern Marianas and denied him a position that I think he really deserved. But that's the kind of commitment this man has to the marine environment, and I want to acknowledge his presence and his inspiration to me to the introduction of this legislation. And I just want to thank him for being here and recognize his presence and his commitment to assisting in trying to protect this whole entire area. We have to look to our neighbors about what they've done. I really admire what has gone on in Palau, and I know, Madam Speaker, you spent considerable time down there with them. Their protection of the ecosystem is second to none. They understand the importance of the protection of the marine environment. And as a result, when I flew in night before last, there must have been 40 divers on my flight that were on their way down to go dive in Palau. They weren't going to stop here in Guam. They were going to go on and dive Palau. And I understand that. When I was diving, after I dove several times in Palau, I didn't really care to dive here anymore. What they've done in protecting the environment is something that I hope that in the remaining year and a half of this term that I'll be able to get some things through that's going to be able to protect the environment. And I think we can learn from them. We can especially learn from Representative Diego Benavente of the different pieces of legislation that he has introduced up north. I mean, I won't even mention it because I'm sure I would be killed before the end of the session if I said what. But he has done some extraordinary work up there, and their fishermen are still surviving. Their fisheries industry and their fish markets are still working. And so it's important that we, as stewards of the environment, as members of this Guam Legislature, do everything that we can to do this. And I'm glad that we were able to get the intent out. I'm sorry that I allowed it to get past me. But the most important part of this bill is actually on page 3, line 12. It shall be unlawful for any person to possess, sale, offer for sale, take, purchase, barter, transport, export, import, trade, or distribute shark fins in Guam. That's all I wanted to do in this legislation, was to do just that. I wanted to join Representative Diego Benavente, Senator Clayton He, and the members of the Palau legislature in joining across the Pacific to have everybody understand that we 4 jurisdictions, the Marianas, Palau, and Hawaiian Islands, recognizing that there are 2 jurisdictions here in the Marianas. But through these 3 areas, we were not going to be part of a practice, and even if we weren't practicing it, We were not going to be used to be a place where you could transship these parts. We were not going to be a market for it. We weren't going to have anything to do with encouraging this inhumane practice. And to tell you the truth, Madam Speaker, I was glad that the distraction went to the fishermen and they were all upset about, because my fear was that this legislation was going to be opposed by the Hotel and Restaurant Association and the Chinese Chamber of Commerce. I was very heartened to hear from the from the chairman, that the chairman of the Chinese Chamber of Commerce, that they weren't eating shark fin anyway, and it didn't really matter. But that was what I feared, that our big donors in those communities would be the ones that objected. And that was what going to happen. But there wasn't a peep out of them. And so I'm glad that everybody got caught up and the world went elsewhere, because then they didn't focus on that line on line 12, that you can't sell or sell it here in any way, and that you have 90 days after the enactment of this law to deplete your inventory of it and stop the practice of selling it in the restaurants here. But that's all I wanted to do, Madam Speaker. I wanted to join Senator Clayton He and Representative Diego Benavente and all the members of the Palau Legislature in trying to make us more aware of our responsibilities to protect and be good stewards of the environment, so that our children and their children would be able to see and understand the ocean as we saw it. I mean, I marveled the other day when I saw that story in the newspaper about a study that was done at the university about the ancient practice of walking the reef and catching fish at night. Because I remember as a child, when I was growing up in Piti, the times that some of my uncles in the village would take me out and we would walk the reef and that practice. Unfortunately, we completely depleted everything. We can no longer do that. But I think with this first step of understanding that we join 3 other jurisdictions, Hawaii, Northern Marianas, and Palau, in making the world understand that through these areas, beware, we are not going to participate in and be a party to the inhumane practice of finning, be it as a market in the restaurants or in any way participating in transshipment through our airport or through our port. And so I'm very glad that it sounds like my colleagues, after we've removed the incendiary language in the intent, understand that the most important part is that we prohibit this practice, and more importantly, not only prohibit the practice, but announce to the world that we are not going to partake in its sale or its consumption. So that hopefully when we choke off that market or don't participate in that market, there'll be no need, there'll be no demand for that, and therefore we can allow nature to take its own course. And so I want to thank the chairman of the Committee on Rules. I'm sorry that I was not here during this very contentious period. I want to thank him as chairman of the committee for having the hearing and being the one that went out and fended off some of the people that were upset about the bill. I appreciate the fact that he took a lot of heat over this bill, and I apologize. The legislative intent may have induced some of that opposition, but I think all of us can agree, if we can just let nature, or as the good senator from Barrigada puts it, if we could just give nature a chance to balance itself out, we would all be better off. And so I want to thank my colleagues, and especially the chairman of the committee, for all his work in in putting this together, in receiving all this testimony. And I know that the 3 or 4 inches of testimony that he's brought in today was nothing compared to the thousands of emails that he received. it shorted his iPhone because of all the emails that he was getting. And so I'm just glad, Madam Speaker, and I hope that in the future that I can look to the rest of you to join me and the example that has been set by Diego Benavente and the members of the Palau Legislature in protecting the ocean environment for our children and for their posterity. And so I ask for my colleagues' support for this legislation. And Madam Speaker, knowing your desire to make me stop talking, no. Your desire to participate in the protection, and I know that in your position in APIL that you understand the importance of this green movement throughout, or this blue movement throughout our area, that we would be honored if you would join us as the second co-sponsor on this legislation.
Sure.
Well, you're the first co-sponsor.
Okay.
I thought I was trying to figure out that number when somebody did a number, and then I realized that second co-sponsor is the number 3.
On the amendment without any objections, so ordered. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Speaker. May I be permitted to be recognized at the request of the minority leader to make a notwithstanding motion to allow Representative Diego Benavente privilege of the floor? Seems almost appropriate, and I thank the good Senator Frank Blas for bringing that to our attention.
Okay, so
And also former Senator Carlotta Leangora is also...
so are there any objections from the body? No objection, and so ordered. Okay. We have Senator Pangilinan also who would like to speak on the bill. You still do? Yes. And Senator Sam Mabini also, I have you on the list.
Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise in support of the bill and certainly thank everyone who participated in the discussion on this. As good Senator from Afami and Ganya Heights mentioned, we attended a forum of the fishermen at the Guam Fishermen's Co-op at their invitation to all senators to discuss this matter and other issues affecting the fishermen and the fishing community here on Guam. And the discussion was really the verbiage and the language that we used, and as Senator Espaldon, former Senator Espaldon knows, when you attend those meetings, as we have in the past, the discussion is quite lively. But there was even a discussion of what's the best approach to this thing? What are we trying to do with regards to shark finning? We're just trying to say you can't do it. We don't believe that it's the right practice. We think it's a waste of resources. We think it creates an imbalance in nature. But mostly, it's something that's not part of us and part of our activity to waste our ocean resources like that. And to pass something with any kind of implication that the fishermen on Guam do not value the resources of the ocean and would waste the rest of the shark while taking the fin and the tail, it grates them in a fashion that even if it's implied, they rise up to defend themselves. Because they have been, and we tell them that it's their practices and their activity out in the ocean that deplete our resources, and nothing can be further from the truth, according to the fishermen. That if they take it all today, there's nothing for them tomorrow. Nobody understands that more than them. So when they go out there, they don't take the smallest fish and every fish they find. They practice the conservation, and they decide, that we're going to keep this one and throw the other one back, and we'll find him again, a year from now with more. And so the idea that they were all got caught up as in this process was not pleasant for them because of what it created in terms of the international community's focus on them, quite frankly. That we're doing this because the rest of the world and our Guam fishermen are doing these things. And I think that we have finally resolved that matter with the amendments that we've made in this bill. But at that meeting, I said, you know, what's the most effective way of influencing behavior? It's to, number one, do you take the resource away, or do you take what the market away? So, you know, when Benigno Aquino was running for president of the Philippines, he came out with a slogan that we thought was just very simple. But it really is the same set of words, just put in different order. Because what does it achieve, and how do you achieve it? You know, when he was running for the president of the Philippines, his slogan, and I can't even remember which one it is now, but I think his slogan was, no corruption, no poverty. It wasn't no poverty, no corruption. It was no corruption, no poverty. And so what that does is, it's not the poverty that's the problem, it's the resources and what corruption feeds on, you know, and what it deprives people. It deprives people of the economic resources for the development of the country that would uplift their lives. So it's not you won't have corruption without poverty, is you won't have poverty without corruption. So when we talked about shark finning, was it like no fin, no market, or no markets, no fins, you know? And so to me, it would have been no market, no fins. So you just can't have it. You can't have any products imported into Guam. You can't serve it in the restaurants. You can't take it for medicinal purposes, and you know, and so forth. And then nobody will fin, because no market, no fin. But whatever the final decision is in this fashion of the bill, I think we have made a great statement to the rest of our community that we value our resources, that we don't have wasteful practice of resources and of wasteful practices in the harvesting of our ocean resources, of which shark finning is one of the most notorious wasteful practices that we have in terms of depleting the resources of the ocean. And when you deplete that resources of the ocean, then you throw off the balance of nature in the ocean, and it all then falls like dominoes in terms of what the effect of our environment would be. You take out that predator in that cycle, and you throw off the balance. And we're seeing some of that happen with some of our preserves, that we have said we're going to let everything in there, but somehow, because now you don't have any other activity in there, we're seeing and having to re-examine the balance that's in those preserves. So I want to thank once again the Vice Speaker for this piece of legislation. I think it is a good face of Guam in the international community. And we thank, of course, the former Speaker of the CNMI Legislature, Diego Benavente, for pushing us a little bit to re-examine of what kind of face we want to place. And that is the face that mirrors, you know, their face in terms of the international community in this. And we're going to ask the CNMI to take a look at some of the other things up there that may help us present a united face to this community, most especially in the military buildup. We're going to ask that we leverage this desire of the U.S. to just bomb the hell of our lands away, you know, for basically nothing. And that we're going to try and work together on trying to preserve those kind of resources that may be good, you know, may have some economic benefit today, but when we take a look over the long run, that, you know, it doesn't foster the same face that we're presenting with this proposal today and what they have accomplished in passing the shark finning legislation and the banning of that wasteful resource of the ocean. So, of course, we join our other and fellow islanders in Hawaii, The original presentation did not go as far as Hawaii did. The amendments that were presented to us by the Fishermen's Co-op and supported by this body takes us closer to that more comprehensive practice in Hawaii with regards to including chumming and the activity that that presents and the imbalance that it creates in nature out there and the economic exploitation of a resource that shouldn't be exploited in that manner outside of the balance of nature. So once again, it's a great step that we're taking in terms of providing the face of the Pacific Islander, our love for our oceans and our resources, and the fact that we will not tolerate the practice of activities in our ocean resources that waste such a precious resource that we have. Water is bigger than all the lands combined that we have in our Pacific Islands. The water is the foundation of our culture and our community out here, and anything we do to preserve the resources and keep those resources in balance in that environment, I think is a very, very positive step for ourselves and for the rest of this planet. Thank you very much, and Sidusmasi.
Thank you, Senator Pangilinan. On the motion, Senator Mabini, you recognize.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise in support Bill 4431. I commend our Vice Speaker and Senator Respicio for this bill. You know, I'm speaking not only because I think that the bill is a just bill, but as an avid scuba diver and who has also witnessed both our waters here in Sinamai and CNMI as well as in Palau. If anything that I want to share with our colleagues is that having firsthand witnessed an actual ecosystem that's so healthy, that included sharks that I've never seen, the sizes of those in Guam, and to see the array of pelagic fish as well as reef fish all cohabitating together because an ecosystem is protected. That's a model that I'm so glad that this bill will help promote. In Palau, you know, before I used to dive here, and I've only seen regular reef fishes and some, you know, other pelagic fish. But it was only in Palau when I saw a 12 or 15-foot shark swim by me several times, and I touched it, and he wasn't interested in me. He was interested in all the other fish, and it was just an incredible ecosystem. And we are bringing people out to Guam. This is our water is our playground. It's also a place for a resource for our local folks, and it is our responsibility to protect it. By doing this, by supporting this bill, I feel we're sending a clear statement that we are taking control of our environment, and not just our land, but also our ocean environment. So I commend again those who have entered the bill. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Mabini. On the motion, Senator Dueñas, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. You know, the retiring speaker from Barragata would probably appreciate this. I don't normally quote Democratic presidents, but you know, in the hearing, Madam Speaker, in the good words of President Obama, there was a very strong teachable moment that was provided for. We had hundreds of students that came here and protested and supported the legislation. And through that entire time that we sat there and listened to all of them and took their thousands of signatures that they had put together, I asked a simple question while appreciating their passion and their understanding of the issue. With their instructors there, their teachers, and everybody else that supported them, and parents, I asked a simple question of all of them. While appreciating, as I said, their passion, I said, has it ever been part of your curriculum or part of any teaching, while we're being so passionate about our reefs and saving our sharks, about the devastating effects of erosion, and the fact that our reefs around Guam, because of water or because of runoff due to construction, and that EPA has even now sent down notifications that with all this construction coming up with the buildup, they're going to enforce heavily stormwater drainage, runoff control, and all the other issues surrounding that. So in a lot of ways, including the legislative intent, all of the controversy that was brought up, it really, and I tell you, I'm a fisherman, and while we are cordial and good friends most of the time, it is hard to get fishermen in one area to agree on something. And so it brought people together, not only the fishermen, to really get behind an issue and make sure that we didn't have first of all, the children learned a lot, and I know the teachers went back and certainly had to provide a balanced perspective. And as the good speaker from Barragata said, as we look now to the marine preserves and should implement that 5-year observation that we said we were going to go back and find out, as the co-op said, they had to have 2 70-pound barracuda removed from some of the preserves because some people were scared to be in that area because they've gotten to be so large. So in all of the discussion and all of the discussion on this bill, it's brought up a lot of opportunities to review policies and to understand the effects of not only elimination of a predator, an apex predator that's supposed to be in the environment, but everything that we do to affect the environment of the ocean and its balance. So I appreciate, while difficult as some legislation is at times, the fact that we've arrived at this place. As I said, many teachable moments were brought about, and to include the good amendment that was put forward. That, Madam Speaker, we don't send a mixed message where we say, yes, we shouldn't eliminate sharks, but possibly we can set up feeding stations to attract sharks and to create this activity which could be dangerous for fishermen. So this is a nice, good piece of legislation that I believe has been created, and I certainly, if it is placed in the third reading in that form, rise in support of it and can vote for it. And I'm glad it created the controversy, because out of that controversy came a lot of understanding and respect once again for our ocean resources. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you very much, Senator Duenas. On the motion, Senator Munya Barnes, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. If I may, on the bill. There was a provision on the bill that talks about reporting requirements and how it's to be presented. And as I'm looking over the page with my colleague right now, I just want to make sure that the reporting requirements on page, I want to say on page 6, consultation on 63114.4.
We only have 5 pages.
Page 4, section
Okay.
6.
Oh, section
Dispense out.
6. Okay, what line?
On line 24.
24.
You know, it says every 5 years this act shall be reviewed by Department of Agriculture. In doing so, the department shall consult with UOG, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, local fishermen, including the Guam Fishermen's Cooperative Association, the Marianas Underwater Fishing Federation, and the Guam Organization of Saltwater Anglers, to have a local input to balance the scientific data presented. And, you know, as they consult with these guys and they do this report, just want to know who it's going to be forwarded to. So maybe I'd like to include legislation to include on line 24 that the report shall be forwarded, the completion of the report shall be forwarded to the legislature, I guess 30 days after completion. If that's okay with everybody.
So the amendment then is on page 4, line 26. That
Four.
the 24, that to balance the scientific data to be reported, so delete presented,
No, yeah, wait.
to be reported
To have
to
linked
the
to the balanced
legislature.
data presented, and to report, and to provide the report to the Guam Legislature 30 days after completion.
Provide the report to the legislature 30 days
After completion.
completion. On the amendment,
Something like
objection?
No objection.
No objection, so ordered.
Si
Thank you
Diyos
very much.
maasi, I just think, Madam Speaker, that this is a good bill, and in our efforts to working closely with our other island brother and sister countries, I think we should act on this legislation. So thank you, and si
Thank you
Diyos
very
maasi.
much, Senator Munya Barnes. So on the motion then to send Bill 44-31 COR as substituted to the third reading file. Senator Pangilinan, you have another.
Madam Speaker, I know I may be out of order on this, but there was another section that required a report or Department of Agriculture to license, to issue permits for studies, to conduct research on shark fins.
Can you bring us to that page?
It would be on page, under shark fins, 63114.1, and that the copies of those studies shall also be forwarded to the legislature or be made public record.
Okay.
I think we have something that may be general language.
Yes, and
where we conduct
is there no
research.
objection then that legal counsel can pull that same language? Okay, so ordered. Thank you very much for that. So on the motion then to send Bill 44-31 COR as substituted by the committee and on the floor to the third reading file without any objections, ordered. We're going to take a lunch recess until 2 o'clock this afternoon.
We're back from recess. We've already dispensed bill number 44 that's gone down to third reading for voting. We are now on bill number 48, which is authored by Speaker Judith Wampat, and I'll go ahead and yield to her at this time to read it on the floor, to read the title on the floor and to move it. Speaker Wampat, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'd like to make a motion to place Bill 48-31 as substituted by the Committee on Youth, Cultural Affairs, Procurement, General Government Operation, and Public Affairs to third reading file with some discussion.
Please proceed.
Okay. Thank you very much again, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, Bill 48-31 really is relative to establishing an expedited procurement, or better yet, maybe you're right, expedited procurement procedures for the Department of Education to the disbursement of stimulus funds under the 2009 American Recovery and Reinvest Act. And just to give our colleagues some background, is that the government of Guam has been granted close to about $240 million in federal stimulus funding, and many of the ARIS provisions include really stringent clause such as use it or lose it, and then deadlines also again are stated, and which requires that the state uses the federal stimulus funds as quickly as possible or the funds will be reallocated to other states. An approximate balance of about $150 million plus in federal stimulus funding, including about over $80 million for the Department of Education itself, remains to be obligated and or expended on or before September 30th, 2011, which is just this year. Many states, who are confronted with this same situation, has actually passed some legislations in 2009, specifically intended to reap the maximum benefits of the ARA funding, including methods to comply with its deadlines. And two particular states in the research conducted by our Attorney General's office is Colorado and Hawaii, both of which have procurement laws patterned after the American Bar Association's model procurement law, like Guam, and both of which make changes to their procurement law specifically to accommodate the quick use of ARA funds. Hawaii streamlined the procurement process and protest process for ARA funded procurements, and and raised the threshold for small purchases, regardless of the source of fund, to be able to meet that sunset in 2012. And that was the recommendation that was originally sent down in the original bill. The government here in this case, we feel that needs some temporary relief in the form of an expedited procurement, similar to that taken in Colorado and Hawaii. And Madam Speaker, what had happened then in the public hearing, and we made it clear that this is not the intent to provide any permanent exemptions or permanent relief. It was actually just to sunset the time in 2012. The ARA grants has very strict and specific accountability and transparency provisions to prevent fraud, waste, and abuse, to ensure then against poor contracting or grant management, and to ensure that the use of competitive procedures. And in a discussion that we had in a round table, this was brought forward. There were actually supposed to be 2 companion bills, and in the roundtable discussion, we decided that for Bill number 19 that there will not be a need, that the Attorney General was going to work very closely with the Department of Education, provide and deputize, so to speak, the attorneys at the 2 attorneys of DOE. And then it was also brought to our attention by the third-party fiduciary agent that they, as you know, the agent having oversight of federal funds, were willing to be able to provide this oversight, provide accountability and transparency for all federal dollars, and to include the ARA fundings, and we wanted to make sure that there was not going to be additional expense to the government or additional ARA monies to be used for this third-party fiduciary agent who is going to be in the department for 3 to 5 years. Now, originally, yes, I know there was that request to raise the purchases and raise the ceiling, but as you can see in the bill, that then was deleted. And you know, originally I know that the individuals who came to testify felt that they didn't want to remove that, and I know that I had basically asked the individuals there. We have the Attorney General's office, we have the attorney from DOE. We also have an interested third party who's not really involved, but has actually been working with procurement laws, teaching that at the university, and has a very good understanding of it. And I have, you know, the utmost respect for Mr. Brown. We also had the office of the public auditor herself, Ms. Brooks also, and we all, you know, definitely regard, you see, her audits of any of the government funds and the expense of you know, government monies, and so I look to all of those individuals basically also as experts in the sense of the procurement law itself and what the law says, to make sure that we're not going to be in violation of our existing legislations or existing laws. And in that whole discussion, the public auditor felt a little bit more comfortable in the sense that because there is that third-party fiduciary agent, that, you know, she felt that the process that was being recommended would not be a major problem per se. But in all the discussion, it was originally going to be open to everyone else, like GCC, UOG, and other departments and agencies who were going to receive these ARA fundings. And it was decided that then, because the greatest amount that we're talking about here will be the Department of Education, so then the bill was then substituted then to make it just for the Department of Education. The chairman, the committee on the long title, the name of the committee, the Committee on Youth, Cultural Affairs, Procurement, General Government Operations, and Public Affairs amended the bill, and that's what then finally I would speak to. But there is still that same language there of a waiver shall be granted upon the written approval of the governor and the public auditor, confirming that the requested waiver meets the criteria set forth in this section, and a written determination of the basis for and the scope of the waiver, including but not limited to the specific code provision being waived and the alternative selection process to be used, and that this then, as a result of the third party being there, shall be signed by the third party fiduciary agent of the Department of Education, acting on behalf of the superintendent, the governor, and the public auditor, or their respective designees. So, and then the sunset language also saying that this section then will be repealed on September 30th, 2012, unless the federal grantor agency authorizes an extension of time for the obligation or expenditure of ARA funds, and in which case this section shall be repealed at the end of the extension period. So, Madam Speaker, I know that this is such a, would be considered, I realize, controversial in the sense that I know there are some of our members who feel that they want the department to continue with the existing legislation as is, with the procurement law rather, and move forward with that process. It's unfortunate, however, that if we were last year discussing this and if the department had moved forward, but there were other things that beyond their control, such as the third party being in place, because they would not, USDOE would not release any fundings until that third party is in place, and they did not really, they were not in place until late, as a matter of fact, at the end of the last year, the fiscal year, in December of 2010. Therefore, when you think where we're at, we're nearing the end of February. That's going to leave the department, with 7 months to be able to push all of these projects out. It is the decision when several of us were in Washington, not last year, but the year before that, when we first heard of these stimulus monies being made available to the states and territories. One of the questions because that was with the National Council of State Legislatures conference, and the concern by all of the legislators throughout the 50 states and territories is that how were these monies then going to be channeled through the different governments, and who will be making the final decision? And in that case, because they were doing an analysis of that law, one of the things that was very clear is that it is going to be the governor. And a lot of states were concerned that, they were hoping that the legislature would have some say-so in the matter. And what the governor decided to do in this case then was that he had called in where the monies are primarily coming from, for the educational institutions, that DOE, GCC, and UOG were called in and, were asked what, ready projects do you have? And basically was soliciting from each one of the state of those educational institutions to provide some input in terms of how they wanted their money to be spent. The superintendent has made the decision and is standing by her decision that because of the number of schools that we have, and a lot of our schools that are fairly old, with the exception of the 4 new schools that were built, that she would like to see a lot of the monies go to the 37 schools, 38 schools, and to address 5 major projects in each one of those schools. We're talking about electrical upgrades, they're talking about structural work to be done, with roof leaks, plumbing, and let me see what else. Anyway, but there are like 5 projects, and and of course, I was concerned as well that when you consider these 5 projects per school, then we're talking about a lot of projects and a lot of reporting to be done, and that was the question, of course, that we had asked even the third-party fiduciary agent, their attorney, and the department, whether they would be able to handle all those projects, spend these monies, and report on the progress of the monies being used and spent. And they feel that they'll be able to do this with the 2 attorneys that they have for the third-party fiduciary agent, and that, following the procurement laws, that they, of course, feel that they'll be able to handle it, move forward, and expend these monies to all of the different schools for repair and maintenance, because it's been a while, actually many years, in which the department has been able to receive any substantial amount from the government to address maintenance problems within our schools. So this is only a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that the department will be able to receive and use the monies for their schools. I realize that, we've had a discussion at one time, considering that, yes, take the money and use it for one major project, and maybe later on, sometime down the line, whether, we're going to borrow monies again for capital improvement projects, because, currently we're saying that we don't have the cash to be able to do that. So it may mean either borrowing again to do just that. So whether we want to do the reverse or not, it is not, of course, a decision of this legislature to make. If it was ours, and we had requested for that at the NCSL conference when we were having that discussion, but it was made very clear to us that that's not a decision of the legislature, but that of the governor of each state and territory. All I ask, Madam Speaker, I realize that, again, like I said, because we're talking about the streamlining, or not really that so much, because we've cut major portions of this, that we're not now going to increase the ceiling for the small purchases or large purchases, meaning that that will remain as is. The only provision here, if you look on page 4 of the bill, that, was it page 4? Let me see. Page 3.
Madam Speaker, if I may, just for 1 minute, just so that my colleagues know that this is the substituted version that we're looking at.
Yes, the
So-
substituted bill has 4 pages.
Right. So just make sure that you're looking at the substituted version of Bill 48, which
And-
deals just with DOE.
Yes, and you're right, it's just for DOE, and there is, so everything is, in terms of the findings and intent are basically intact, and the main piece of it, of course, only is just that emergency waiver, and they should be able to move forward. I'm not going to argue in terms of whether, yes, we may want to have it, or not. I know what the rules of engagement here is, that although I may have been the one to have submitted filed this bill as the primary author of the bill, but that once it reaches the floor, that it is then, of course, that it belongs to the body to improve on it, whether to delete or add other items. I leave it to our body. I'm just hoping that we do not make it so difficult that the department would not even be able to move forward because of any one of the one department of all departments and agencies within the government that is sorely in need of this cash infusion into our facilities, our school facilities, would definitely be the Department of Education. I ask that you you read carefully, I guess, listen to the dialogue as well, and also think that, we've heard the discussions many times back and forth with the executive branch and the legislative branch in terms of our financial state, where we are financially with cash, and the fact that, here we're talking about over $80 million that could be made available to the Department of Education. So I ask my colleagues, naturally, like every bill that comes before all of us, is that you give it full consideration, and more importantly, ask for your vote of support for Bill 48 as substituted. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
You're very welcome, Speaker Wonpat. On Bill number 48, on the main motion, does anyone wish to speak about the substituted version? Anybody wish to speak on the motion, on the main motion? Senator Chris Duenas and then Senator Frank Blas.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would just respectfully request if the Speaker would yield.
Go
I
ahead
just
and
have
state
a
your
question.
Go ahead.
I understand giving, I guess, some more liberal provisions, but in deleting the raising of the ceiling, what have we done for them? I thought we understood that because they have the third-party fiduciary and they have the ability to be a little bit more accountable, or quite a bit more accountable for these expenditure of funds, that the ceiling request or the need, as stated in other legislation in other jurisdictions, was where we're intending to go. Madam Speaker.
Thank you very much for that question, because I agree with you, and I know at the very beginning, Madam Speaker, when the dialogue took place, like I said earlier, with Mr. Brown, and who's an attorney and very knowledgeable about the procurement law, the attorney from DOE, the AG, two of them, the AG himself and the assistant AG, and then Ms. Brooks. And Ms. Brooks was taking the same position as Mr. Brown until then, when she found out that there is a third-party fiduciary agent who will be then having oversight of all of the procurement and the expenditure of these monies. Then she felt, well, then that was fine, because the whole idea was to make sure that there is accountability and transparency, and with the announcement of the third party, she basically said then she's fine with that, but just DOE and not the others. I know that Mr. Brown was concerned about that, was concerned that if we're going to go down that road, is that you might as well have a police officer standing behind you, watching everything that you're doing to make sure then that there be no fraud. Suggested even they're increasing not to 100,000, but just making it from 15 to even 25, and even with that, it was really difficult for him. The argument has been that, and I really should maybe the one answering this. I should ask the chairman to answer it, because he did amend my bill, but I'm gathering that because of some other concerns, that they decided just to stay away from that and just allow for, like I said, if you really look at the bill, they got it just about everything, with the exception of Section 2, that does provide that waiver whenever there is a need to do that, whether it's going to pass through as quickly as possible. Your guess is as good as mine. I'm just concerned that after this, and with only Section 2, we can actually expect that maybe most of these monies would be returned to the U.S. Treasury.
Senator Duenas, does that address your concerns? Or
I guess I'll wait to question the author of the substituted version. I'm just at a loss to understand what we're going to accomplish here, and maybe there is something that I'm not reading that's contained in this section that's going to expedite the expenditure and the capability for the expenditure of the funds, but I don't. As the good Vice Speaker returns to the room, I guess I'll redirect the question in just a moment. But yeah, Mr. Vice Speaker,
If you can, go ahead and, there's a yield
Would
to
you yield?
you, Vice Speaker, as you're the author of the substituted version. Senator Duenas, go ahead and state your question, and then I'll address it to the Vice Speaker.
okay, yeah, Madam Chair. Once again, my question is, in review of the substitute version under Section 2, I'm trying to find out where the liberalization of the ability to expend the funds with regard to the ARA funds, as previously constructed in the original version, it was a waiver of funds under contractual, I believe, to $250,000, and for services to $100,000, to with sunset provisions and all of those safeguards contained. And without that specific language, I'm just trying to see where we're going here and how we're helping, in particular, Department of Education, to expend their funds in an expedited manner.
Vice Speaker BJ, would you like to answer?
Well, I would yield, say, for the fact that this was drafted by the staff getting together from the public hearing, and this was supposed to be the way that this was going to be resolved. You will note from the voting sheet, I am not in favor of this piece of legislation. And so this is having to go through and is moving through as quickly as possible with the main author's request, and I have no idea how it's supposed to be resolved. But I'm not in favor of it. But that doesn't mean that I, as chairman, I'm going to withhold it. I reported it out, and it's up to this body to do with what it wants. But I think at the roundtable you heard that my vehement opposition to trying to save DOE from itself. It had been given the perfect opportunity by Senator Ben on how to be able to use this money. And their obstinance is now where we're at, and their incompetence has just compounded it.
So, Madam Speaker, I think I'm going to work with the author of the original legislation to see if we can get that segment reintroduced. And the reason why is because at the public hearing, when we were discussing the issue of Department of Education, even then, the public auditor registered her agreement because of their current structure. In fact, in the old piece of legislation, I was crafting legislation or an amendment to see if we could perhaps get the public auditor involved at the front end instead of a policeman, an auditor, somebody who could provide the technical expertise at the front end. But now that we're in this version, and as I said, the testimony was there, and we could go back and review the testimony. But my understanding is that because they have the third-party fiduciary and there is a magnifying glass on their expenditure of funds, that it would be acceptable. And that's why we moved to basically put to at least help Department of Education in this area, and Public Works and other institutions will be up to fend for themselves. But understanding that Department of Education is critical at this point with regard to their need and their requirement for small contracts and goods and services. So I'm going to work on that now, Madam Speaker. Thank you.
Senator Duenas, are you asking to see if you can come back to make a possible amendment?
Yeah, I think we should take a recess and discuss this, because I don't see anything in this particular provision in the substitute version that's going to change anything with regard to the expedited expenditure of funds. I mean, there may be some language in here that loosens, I'm not reading it right now, but I do, at least I think the dollar amounts are necessary at this point, and even the legal counsel for education had presented that when she was there, and I believe even Mr. Brown was somewhat understanding to Department of Education, but was not in favor for the other institutions such as Public Works and any other entity receiving the funding. I think he concurred that there is a strong watchdog right now that would ensure the transparency.
At DO.
Sure.
Yes.
So
Okay.
I would request.
You know what, I'm going to go ahead
a
and,
recess at
and
this
ask
point.
for a 5-minute recess so that you guys could talk and for any possible amendments. And so we're going to go ahead and take a 5-minute recess.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Legislature's back from recess, and when we left off, Senator Chris Duenas, you still have the floor. Please proceed.
I'm satisfied that, in fact, it may appear as though the ceilings are even more liberal than the original legislation in the substitute version. So we'll see where that debate goes. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Duenas. We also have to speak on the main motion. Is Senator Frank Blas? My bro, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. You know, Madam Speaker, in the words of a esteemed colleague from previous legislature, every time we seem to talk about this agency, it costs us millions of dollars. And it seems to be true again here. You know, Madam Speaker, I recognize and the funding that has been provided by this government to be able to maybe stabilize its services and infuse much needed cash into its economy. You know, but that said, there comes a point in time when you're in government that, you know, first off, I recall the times and all the press releases and the hoopla that, you know, that was out when the announcement and the pronouncements that this money had been released and it's going to go to, some of this money was going to go to shovel-ready projects, and we've got all of these projects all lined up and we're ready to go. What happened? What happened between the time of those pronouncements and now? And now we come to a juncture, we come a point in time here where it says, you know what, despite everything that we said 2 years ago, now we see a problem, or we have a little bit of a problem. And I don't believe, and I find it very difficult to say that, well, in order for us to be able to do this, to accomplish this, we're going to provide an opportunity, albeit you can't waive all the laws that with regards to procurement. We'll give you the opportunity to waive some. What is going to be the basis and the criteria for that waiver? What is going to be the threshold that's going to be used? And if granted, if it's going to be on a case-by-case basis, what precedence is going to be set? And is there going to be an argument based on those precedents set? Is one project going to be allowed to be able to waive for procurement of items up to $100,000 for one school, yet for another school it's going to be only for $25,000? What is the standard? And then with regards to the conversations that we had during in the break, at the end of the day, who's going to be responsible for it? Who's going to answer to it? And so, I must admit, there was other proffers and there was other conversations they had with regards to other alternatives to be able to use this, and right now I'm more amenable to those things. But when it comes to the provisions that's set for this bill, the way it is set right now, as broad as the interpretation is with it, I'm very uncomfortable with that. Furthermore, I noticed that on page 1, line 12, it says that the Guam Department of Education remains to be obligated and or expended on or before September 30th, 2011. If I am made to believe that that is the expiration date for this funding, why do we give this section, why do we give this legislation an effective date up until September 30th, 2012? And then provide that unless the federal grantor agency authorizes an extension of time for the obligation of expenditure of our funds, in which case this section shall be repealed at the end of the extension period. Why can't we use that this section is repealed effective September 30th, 2011, and if the federal government or the grantor decides to on an extension, that this will continue until that extension is expired? What's the purpose and the necessity for the extra year? And I hate to say this, but it may come a point in time where individuals can say, okay, well, we got until September 30th, 2012, so we can sit down and we can continue to twiddle our thumbs the way we did it since 2009, since we got the money. We've got to put some sense of urgency. If this is going to pass, we have to put some sense of urgency on this agency to spend it. I don't want to come back here on September 1st, 2012, and for them to say, oh, well, you know what? We ran into a problem again. And from our good former colleague in Tuwinning, it's going to cost us another $1 million. So maybe let me start backwards a little bit in helping this and hopefully to spur the discussion. I'd like to move, ma'am, that on page 4, line 10, that this section is repealed effective September 30th, instead of 2012, make it 2011, and then continue that language unless the federal grantor agency exercises or authorizes the extension of time. There is that provision already that's there.
On that motion, I know he's trying to save trees, so on line 10, effective September 30th from 2012 to 2011. On the amendment, are there any objections there? Speaker Wampet, you're recognized on the amendment.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Yes, that language on page 1 is correct, that remains to be obligated and or expended. See, and there's a big difference. You obligate these monies anytime between now and up to the last that you can award that contract will be September 30th. But you see, what you want to do is that you can't just end it all there. You've got to have that extra time, and maybe 1 year might be too long, but what it is for the completion of these projects, that they should all be done within that time frame as the monies are, being expended. You're obligating it at that particular time. Doesn't mean that they all have to be spent on September 30th. You obligate it, and they're spending the monies as they do their projects. And then here, unless, of course, now you're right that they're going to authorize an extension, which I really doubt, because that's going to take an act of Congress to give any extension. It is not left up to the individual agency to make that determination or to give an extension. So, yeah, by the end of the, yes. So you're right. So then, yeah. So yeah. So that would definitely be much.
So
better.
you.
In that case,
Wait,
Madam
that
Speaker, what I'll do is I'll withdraw
No,
my,
I mean, just, okay, you're going to withdraw.
I would
and you're gonna
draw
change
to
it,
moving, and then my new amendment would be then to
Okay.
December 30th, 2011.
December 30th, 2011. So you withdraw your First Amendment of September 30th, 2012
12.
to,
Now to let it read.
right, so that, without objection, motion
Oh,
carries.
December 3rd, I'm sorry, ma'am. Just to make sure, it's the
Right,
last
no,
day of
the
December.
motion, the first motion is withdrawn, and your new amendment will be December 31st,
Right.
2011. Okay, on that amendment, Senator Eileen, do you care to, please proceed.
Speaker Ben is correct in that the monies need to be all spent by December 2011. The way we got to September 2012 is the fact that most of this money is going to be for capital improvement plans. It has already been acknowledged that there's no way they're going to get all the CIP projects done in 3 months. And so there was conversation about weather issues and lapse time, and so the agreement was, and that they were saying that they would get permission from US DOE, that there is some language that says that for CIP projects, there's a year. They hadn't gotten it in writing, but they were looking for that, and so that's how we got to 2012. There's no guarantee at all, but that's how we got to it.
So that's what- Hold on, okay, Senator Eileen, was that did you want Senator Frank Blas, were you yielding to a question or just making that general statement?
I was just
Making a point of information.
So, point of information, Senator Frank Blas, you're recognized.
She was providing that.
Okay.
Yeah. She was providing.
You're
point of
providing the statement. Okay, so anybody else on the December 2011 amendment? Anyone else wishes to speak on that? If not, are there any objections to the motion? If not, motion carries. Senator Blas, bro, you still have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And you know, Madam Speaker, I mean, that would help to satisfy one of my concerns. Again, my overarching concern with regards to this whole thing is, I'm just very uncomfortable of being able to provide, granted, and albeit it's not going to be a blanket waiver, but just the possibilities of which provisions can be waived, which procurement provisions can be waived, and whether or not there's going to be a problem with regards to precedent setting, whether or not there's going to be an issue of consistency. Who's going to determine all of this? And when you're looking at the amount of money that needs to be spent and the number of requests that are probably going to go through the governor's desk and the OPA's desk, it's going to be momentous to be able to keep track and to make individual yet consistent decisions on this thing, which may cause us down the road to run into issues. At the end of the day, somebody's going to have to respond to, okay, how is it that this computer over here costs you $2,000, yet that same computer for this school is going to cost you $5,000? Okay? Then the whole discussion, and I was listening to the discussion that we were having during the break with regards to who's going to be responsible for that, who's going to answer to that. And then I don't want, at the end of the day, for us to have to come back in here and says, you know what, as a result of this thing, we made a boo-boo, and guess what? We're going to have to pay $150 million back. I would rather err on the side of caution here, but you know, at the same time, recognize, come on, there's got to be a point in time. You know, a lot of times when this body has proffered and is offered to be able to provide assistance, it always seems to be that one agency wants to be standalone. So I will continue to listen to it, the discussions that I hope that will continue in order to make this bill, to improve upon this bill. I've provided my offering in as far as improving this bill. But at this point in time, I just got some heavy reservations on supporting it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Senator Blas. Senator Aileen, did you wish to speak on the main motion? Yes. Please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Understanding how this department has deteriorated to where it is, and understanding how we do seem to always have issues in front of us about how to salvage it, I think the biggest concern that I had at the table is, indeed, how do we try to save as much of the ARA monies as we can? After being at a roundtable called by Vice Speaker BJ, and hearing the frustration and the anger, that roundtable was very well attended by very many people across our community. After going to the public hearing and then talking and listening there and then talking to more people, it is a wonder how we're going to get all the announcements out, how we're going to receive all the bids, how we're going to review them, how we're going to do the contracts, how we're going to award them, how we're going to hope there's no protests, and how we're going to have everything awarded by September 2011, and then how we're going to have everything built or expended by December. It's a really daunting task. And as we talk more and more, I don't know how we're going to do that. But what I do know, Madam Speaker, is that I'm hoping that we find a way to actually spend this money for our classrooms. It's a lot of money. And I think we all know how we got to this deteriorated point of public education. Revolving statutes, revolving superintendents, revolving boards. Accountability just wasn't happening. But yet here we are today, trying to figure out how we can salvage $80 million that will help rebuild our schools and infuse technology and training. The question or the issue of accountability needs to happen, but right now I do hope that we do address how we can salvage the opportunity to expend $80 million for our public school system. The idea of waiving was that not everything would go directly to the Attorney General's office, but instead they would have their SAGs at DOE review these contracts and documents, that if there were any waivers, that the governor and the public auditor would have to sign off on those waivers, that the protests would be, everyone at the public hearing was talking about how protests take so much time, and so there was language in there to curtail the protest. What I did walk away with at Vice Speaker Cruz's roundtable and at this public hearing, oh, sorry.
I'll take that as a point of information from the speaker.
Oh, okay, sorry. Speaker Wampat's roundtable, I stand corrected, but Vice Speaker BJ was definitely there. Throughout the whole roundtable, he was there. No, he left. Yes, but it was Speaker Wampat's roundtable. I walked away from those two events knowing that people are very angry and frustrated by the state of affairs. I also walked away with the idea that people still want to help and make it work. And so I think Bill 48 is a way to help and make it work, and September 2011 is right around the corner. And the superintendent is asking for this kind of assistance. And again, notwithstanding all of that conversation, and knowing that the OPA and the AG is right next to her, supporting her efforts, I'm hoping that we can find a way to make this work so we don't waste $80 million. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
You're very welcome, Senator Aileen. Is there anyone else wishing to speak on the main motion on Bill 48? he, okay. So I see Senator Tony Ada, Speaker Pangilinan, and then Senator Guthers.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, if we can just add an amendment here on page 3, line 26. If we can strike out, just to add on the, after public auditor, the Attorney General.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so we can, yeah, we can take out the public auditor, delete public auditor, and put the Attorney General, Office of the Attorney General.
Okay, so the amendment on page 3, on line 26, but reading from line 25, a waiver shall be granted upon written approval of the governor and the Office of the Attorney General. Is that correct?
Correct, Madam Speaker.
We're going to go ahead and save a tree here. So on that, Senator Tony Ada amendment, Senator Tom Ada, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have a concern with that amendment because in an earlier legislation that was passed, which actually then required that all these, that of course all these procurements have to go through the Attorney General's office. They came back later and says, look, you know, you just doubled our workload, but we didn't get any additional resources to be able to review these procurement contracts that are going through. And so as a result, it became a bottleneck and nothing was moving. And so now if they are going to, I presume, every procurement that's going to have to go, that they're wanting to expedite is going to require these waivers. And next thing we know, we're going to be flooding the AG's office again. And it's going to become the bottleneck. So I do have a concern that by then now requiring the Attorney General to be additionally burdened with these reviews, that we're going to create the bottleneck there.
Thank you, Senator Tom. Vice Speaker Cruz on the amendment.
I just want to make something clear, Madam Speaker, that at the round table it became very clear that the AG was not the bottleneck in this. The problem was GDOE was so inept, it took 11 months for them to start from the beginning to try to get their checklist of what they were supposed to do. There were 3 months in there where they didn't even have an attorney on their staff and they didn't have a procurement officer. So they shouldn't blame it on the AG's office.
Si Dos Masi, Vice Speaker. On the Tony Ada amendment, is there anyone else speaking? Speaker Pangilinan, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I support the amendment. What the review here is on the request for a waiver, not the contract itself. Although I don't agree that it should cause such a huge bottleneck, but the request for a waiver is a legal question. Are they meeting the requirements? The request for the review of the contract is a bit more voluminous. So I don't think that this agreeing to waive a provision of the law and the need to review that and decide whether or not you're going to agree to waive 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or all provisions of the procurement code, that's going to be such a burdensome thing that it will become a bottleneck. So in that respect, I certainly support that. It's a legal question, in my opinion, or actually it's even a political question, but has to be on a sound legal basis for the purpose of waiving the requirement. And therefore, if the public auditor was to be given this task, the public auditor, in order to agree to this, is going to go and ask her attorney. She's not going to make this decision all outside of any legal advice. So that's where maybe the bottleneck can occur, because now you're sending a request to a waiver to the public auditor. She takes it and passes it on to an attorney, whereas in the Attorney General's office, it gets immediately put before an attorney for a review, and I think it will expedite it rather than bottleneck it. So that's my perspective on this amendment, and I support the amendment.
Si Jules Masi, Speaker Pangilinan. Are there anyone else wishing to speak to Senator Tony Atta's amendment? If not, Senator Atta, do you wish to close or do you want to ask for the vote? Do you wish to close or do you want to ask for the vote?
We'll just go ahead and close, Madam Speaker. There wasn't any objection.
Oh, okay. Okay. With that being said, or if there's no objections to the amendment, motion carries. Right now, Speaker Pangilinan, you're recognized on the main motion.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I, rise in not so much in opposition. Let's see how I can say it. I don't rise in opposition to this, but I'm not going to support it. How's that? Madam Speaker, I think that one of the things I want to be very clear on is that what we're trying to do here, I don't know where the problem exists, because at the round table called by the Speaker, dominated by the Vice Speaker, we were getting ready to adjourn. And the Governor's Special Assistant says, oh, okay, so I just want to be clear here that if you don't go into session in February, we're going to lose all the ARA grants, and that we're not going to be able to award any grants because we've got all these problems. And I said, don't anybody leave this room. I want for the record to reflect that there is nothing in the procurement law right now that prevents the issuance, the review, and the awarding of these ARA grants. Because they were trying to make it seem like if this legislative body did not pass any legislation, then we can't spend ARA money. And one by one, all the parties involved that will have a hand in authorizing either the process or the decision to award, to issue RFPs, review them and award them, saying there's nothing in the procurement law that prevents them from doing that. So basically what it is if everybody did their job, we could get this done. So even if this bill doesn't pass, depending on the will of this body, I want to be very clear on the record, both the Governor's Special Assistant for Education, the Attorney General, Guam DOE, the third-party fiduciary, stated on the record that nothing in the law prevents them from doing their job, issuing RFP grants, and awarding them, even in a timely manner. Somebody may have to work on a Saturday, but we're not asking you to work on a Saturday for the next 20 years. We may ask you to work on a Saturday for the next 6 months, maybe 3 or 4 Saturdays only, until September 31, when all the RFPs have to be issued, or actually all the RFPs have to be awarded. So you're only going to have to work Saturdays between now and April, because you'd better get all your RFPs out by April. I'm just saying that what we're doing here with regards to this, Madam Speaker, is what we say a shotgun approach. We're going to shoot at something with a shotgun, and of course, we're going to hit something. But you know what? Everything we hit is going to have a gap. There's going to be a gap in everything that we hit, because it splatters, it scatters. It's called a scattergun. So it just, boom, and you got all these holes, none are connected. It's going to be disjointed. We're going to throw this money in with all these processes here that now say we can waive anything, and we're going to have holes in our system, and we're going to waste our time and waste our money. We need to be surgical and strategic in the application and the deployment of this money at this time with these conditions that we're facing. And somebody's got to face to that fact. And the fact that we're going to run and hide because they're going to say it's our fault that we don't give them the opportunity to waste money, I'm not going to be a party to that. I'm not going to stand in here and say, you go and you find every opportunity you can to waste money, put us at risk on having to pay this back. I don't believe that is the prudent thing to do with the situation we find ourselves in. You know, and I know it, you know, they're saying, there he goes again, just because they didn't follow his idea. I'm just telling you, Madam Speaker, you know, and let's just go back one or two ideas. When we first got the ARA grant, presented it, you know what? We need to put the expenditure of this money and the processes that we need to put in place to spend this money in the timely fashion as required by these grants. We need to put it at the top of the food chain. The apex predator, the shark. We need to give it to the shark who's going to push everybody and have everybody running around doing things because they're afraid the shark's going to catch them and eat them alive if they don't do their job. So I said, let's create an ARA expenditure office, a coordinating committee headed by the lieutenant governor at the direction of the governor. And he would be in charge. You know, I'm sure Lieutenant Governor Tenorio will be more pleased maybe with spearheading ARA funding rather than beautification. Or maybe he's not, because I think he chose to do beautification instead of ARA expenditure when we voted on that override. But that's what we needed. And if we had done that 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, we won't be facing this problem today, because I don't care what they say. The bureaucracy responds to the guy at the top. The guy who can tell you your job's not here tomorrow if you don't do it right today. And that's the type of commitment we needed to this process. Of course, you know, they said, oh, no, you can't interfere, you can't do this. I'm not even trying to interfere. You know, I'm just trying to set up a process within the legislative powers and parameters that we have to set up something. So that didn't go. And we were going to continue on our merry way. And I said, let's try to understanding the administrative burden of the reporting of these grants and the awarding and the issuance of the RFP. So let's pick a project. Let's pick one or two projects that will get the biggest bang for our money. And then everything else that we need to do, we'll kind of figure out how to do it with our own local funding. You know, if we don't put the $35 million or $40 million to JFK, that we're going to pay back over 200, let's appropriate $200 million to DOE at this time on a continuing basis with $20 million every year or whatever the debt service is every year for this $45 million, that now we're going to get one project and going to have to pay out $210 million in interest. Can you imagine if that interest payment went back into DOE every single year for the next 20 years? That's $10 million a year. Wouldn't that be a better bang for our buck rather than spending $35 million, build the school, and pay $210 million to off-island bond purchasers, and they get to spend our money? Once again, no, we don't want to do that. You're interfering. Okay, I lost that fight too. But we're still getting JFK built because we put in a provision that they couldn't do it without providing for JFK. And so where do we now find ourselves right back here? We talked to DOE, spoken to them, impressed upon them the need to get going on ARA. The excuse was, well, we didn't get our third-party fiduciary, so we couldn't spend the money. Oh, wait a minute. You couldn't spend the money because you didn't issue RFPs and you don't have contracts to award. It doesn't matter whether the third-party fiduciary was here or not. If you had all of that done, planned and executed your procurement process and your RFP and your assessment, the only thing we spent money on is assessments. And I think we spent close to $8 million on assessments. Why is it that that's the only thing we can issue RFP out and do in a timely manner is to award consultants? What happened to construction instead of consulting? That's where we should have put our money in. We had a DOE master plan for the improvements of our capital facilities. What did we do? We went out and hired and said, give us $4 million and can you go and see if our master plan's okay? That master plan didn't change. We still have the same requirement. All we did was we spent money on consultants while our real construction plans sat on the shelves. That's what we want to waive all of our procurement requirements for. That's the management, that's the philosophy that we want to say now. Boom, here's your shotgun. Go shoot at anything. If you hit something, way to go. You know? In the meantime, we're going to find all these gaps. And the improvement in the system from this shotgun approach is not going to be noticeable. It may in some instances, but I'm telling you for the greater part, because of the approach that we're taking, we're not going to see sustainable improvement from the deployment of these funds given what we're trying to do today. So I'm going to stay committed to the course that I have set up of continually presenting proposals. The latest proposal that I have, and which I think the governor's responded positively, is let's take the pressure off ourselves, give ourselves more time, make sure we commit ourselves to putting the money aside for DOE, and let's just swap funds. We know that we're going to have to issue payroll every 2 weeks. And we know that the SFSA grant allows us to use those grant monies for the stabilization of the state budget, in this case, DOE. And that we know that if we took that money and reprogramming it with the assurances and blessing of the granting agency, US DOE, that we can spend that ARA fund for the money for payroll, and then we can take the money we've budgeted for payroll and appropriate it on a continuing basis for these capital improvement projects and move forward in that in a systematic fashion that doesn't have a shotgun effect. And you know what? They're going to say, oh, well, you know, we don't have to do that. It reminds me of the JFK. Remember when I proposed the JFK, they said you can't do it because it has to be a reconstruction. It can't be a refurbishment. You can't start from the ground up. You can't build brand new. That's what they said. I said, I don't believe so. And what do? We went and we actually got a letter from US DOE saying, yes, you can, on the JFK project, build from the ground up, brand new construction. It doesn't have to be refurbishment. So I'm pretty confident that in our analysis and research on this concept of reprogramming these funds that we did, I'm confident we did the same kind of research we did when we took on the JFK issue, and that it is a permissible and allowable thing, and we just need the people to be committed to it, to execute it, to at least attempt it, and give us some kind of comfort that we're not going to have to waive all of the protections of the procurement code to our other businesses. You know, in the original presentation was that we were going to increase the small business purchase to $150,000 from the $15,000 at this time. That just means, as we heard in the testimony, that some person down at GSA can call the same 3 guys every $100,000. They said, well, that's the way the feds do it. Well, I don't know, but I was paying attention in our ethics class when our ethics teacher said, in the procurement law, in the feds, small purchase procurement is 100, but there's an obligation to establish a list of people who can provide those goods and services under small purchases, and you rotate. The first one, you call the first 3 guys, then you call the next 3, and the next 3, and the next 3, and you have to document that you are following that system so that there is no favoritism, so that there is an opportunity for everyone in the community to share in the dollars that the government spends and support their businesses. There's nothing in here that would have required that in the proposal. Now we're getting rid of it and saying you can waive that. You don't have to. You can call one guy. You don't even have to call three guys. You can waive calling three guys. That's what we're trying to do here. And I think it's just a bit too overreaching to protect the integrity of the procurement code, to protect our businesses so that everyone gets an equal opportunity to benefit from government contracts and the expenditures of these federal dollars. And so, in that respect, Madam Speaker, I do have a hard time reconciling all of those issues to translate into a support for this piece of legislation. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Thank you very much, Speaker Pangilinan. And Senator Judy Guthert, you're recognized on the main motion.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. First of all, I want to say that I understand the intent of the author of this bill, our Speaker. She doesn't want the Department of Education to lose this opportunity to do something really good for the schools with this money that may not be available again for a long, long time. However, in listening to the debate and in thinking about this bill and looking at it, I'm very scared. That doesn't mean I'm not going to vote for it, but I have to point out some things to you. This is probably the worst way to deal with a deadline. To put this legislature in a situation where we're sort of forced in a corner to do something that we normally would not do. Because I don't think normally we would do this, Madam Speaker. This is not good public administration. If this bill passes the legislature and then it is abused for political reasons by those who will have control over this money, if it will be used as payback for the last election, if it will be used to feather the beds of favored businesses and contractors, the people of Guam lose out, and the American taxpayers lose out. That is my greatest fear. Because in the past, you know, we've allowed over the years, maybe 20, 30 years, there's been situations where hardships have been declared, emergencies have been declared, procurement awards have been made, bypassing regular processes. And what has happened? We all know what has happened. And as a result, some people are portrayed as unethical. Our government is portrayed as corrupt. Our employees are belittled. And our leaders are criticized, including the legislature for letting it happen. I want to ask a question. Have we attempted to request for an extension of the deadline for the use of these funds? Or has the Department of Education requested for an extension of the deadline to use these funds?
Senator Guthert, do you wish to have the author
Yes, I'd like to know if someone can tell me.
Speaker Wampat? Speaker Wampat, there was a question by Senator Guthert in reference to asking if we had asked for an extension. Senator Guthert, would you like to repeat your question again?
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I'd just like to know, has the Department of Education made a serious effort to request that the deadline for the commitment and utilization of these funds be extended to us?
Yes.
Yes,
Speaker
Madam-
Wampat?
Yes, Madam Speaker, I yield to the question. My understanding is, I don't have it in writing, that the superintendent not only requested, put in the request with US DOE, but also the congresswoman, if there is a need then to go that route.
Has there been a response?
The reason I asked, Madam Speaker, is we're being asked to do something extraordinary. And we're trying to respond through our good speaker. We're trying to respond, but we don't have anything to document the need to do this. When you're asked to do something extraordinary, you should have some kind of written document that says, we asked, this is the response, they said no. I'll tell you why to me that's important, because 6 months down the road, a year down the road, when this is abused, what's going to be in the newspaper is that the legislature authorized it. And they authorized it based on good faith, but there is no documentation saying the federal government would not extend the deadline because of hardship circumstances. Again, I know the intent is really positive. The intent is good. We always try to do things right. We try to do things that are good. But when it comes to the implementation, those that implement sometimes have a different agenda. And that's what I'm concerned about. Some kind of safeguards have to be included in this bill. I'm not sure what, to ensure that it is not exploited for political ends, for special interest ends. Talking about millions of dollars, this money should go to eligible businesses that compete for it, and not simply given to you get it, you get it, you get it, because we got to get it finished by tomorrow. So I ask my colleagues, what can we do to ensure that doesn't happen? What safeguards do we have to ensure that that kind of stuff is not going to happen? Can someone answer that question, Mr. Speaker? I'm requesting if someone can answer the question.
Is
Are
there a member
safe-
of the legislature that can
Yes.
yield to that question
Yes.
that has been posed by the...
Are there safeguards in this bill to ensure it will not be exploited and used for political paybacks, special interest awards? Because people of Guam are out there, they're watching us here. I don't mind doing an amendment if I can have the support of my legal counsel here for us. I think it would make the bill better if we have some kind of safeguard included, very strong worded.
I will allow the speaker to come back, you to come back to speak on the bill, and try to see if you can work something out with legal counsel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate that.
Madam Legislative Secretary.
Sidus Masi, Mr. Speaker. You know, Mr. Speaker, I listened to a lot of the issues and concerns in reference to the need of this bill. And one of the things that came to mind as I heard the good speaker from Barragata state that he's not for the bill, but has questions about wanting to go for the bill or something to that effect. But just listening to the concerns from my colleagues here, I was puzzled, and I said to myself, and I even asked a question, if we do nothing about this bill today, based on the concerns that have been discussed in this August body, what will happen? And maybe I'm going to go ahead and change that and pose a question to the author of the legislation, just so that I can find clarity or a delineation of what truly will happen if we do not do anything based on what is safeguarded today as far as procurement procedures, how the ARA was sent down to the Department of Education. Because my concern, Mr. Speaker, is the Department of Education is probably not the only entity that has received ARA funds. There have been other agencies, including the other education of higher learning, that have been given these ARA funds, maybe not as big, but portions of that. And templates have been put into place, and processes have already been done to date. And I'm just, I guess, puzzled based on the statements, including yourself, Mr. Speaker, of what you had shared today and your concerns, and how you guys went out and had literally an intense roundtable discussion regarding this issue. And with that being said, I'd like to go ahead and yield a question to the good speaker who authored this legislation, because I know, if I'm not mistaken, it was a request from the Department of Education. If we do nothing, and based on what we have today, where will we be at based on this timeline?
Yield, Madam Speaker.
Yes.
Thank you.
Well, as stated earlier, if we did nothing, of course the process will continue. It just means, of course, that if there should be a protest, which there's a section here in the bill that calls for a waiver, which is more than likely an abbreviated process, is not to stop it. It just means that when you go through a protest, then it could technically extend the time, could literally hold it. You can even go beyond even the OPA and go to court. So I think the bottom line would be is that we continue not doing anything, that there will be some RFPs that would go out, some awards that would go out, but I don't think it would go to the extent of, utilizing the full amount that's available for the department.
Is that response satisfactory?
Mr. Vice Speaker, though I understand the response given, I also have other concerns in reference to, like I said earlier, what templates have already been put in place by some of the other agencies, and why those templates can't be followed. And with the amount of funding that was given to the Department of Education, if the templates could be adhered to, why can't that process fall through? And I say this like, I'm just really puzzled, because as a policymaker, knowing that we have this set amount given to us through ARA, knowing there's a timeline, knowing that we need to protect what we already have in place, and as far as the procurement process and the follow-through and the steps that are already there in case there's a protest, in case there is an appeal to some higher authority, those things have been in place. So it's like I'm stuck between a rock and a hard place, and my concern is I'm still puzzled that there's a grave need for this kind of legislation to go through, because if we don't do this legislation, then we're not going to get all the grants that we wanted. So, I mean, all the funding that's there for us for the taking. So I'm still really puzzled, if not, I don't know, dumbfounded, I guess, to saying, Jesus, please don't get me wrong. I think the workers of our education system do work, but I know there's something missing here. I'm not grasping it fully, and I'm just saying that while one agency works fine, why isn't this other agency? And I'm just, I guess, wanting to hear further from my colleagues. I'm hoping somebody else will get up and speak. So thank you. I'll still stay close to the issue, and I appreciate you giving me the time to speak, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much. I believe the last speaker on this is Senator Guthards. And so,
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think I have a solution. And legal counsel is helping me. Shouldn't take too long. We're going to add a section to the bill that would deal with transparency, which would require the publication via the island media of an award within 24 hours of the award. And the announcement shall include the name of the company that receives the award, the names of the owners of the company, the amount of the award, the specific project the award is for, and the required deadline for the project to be completed. So this is a disclosure effort so that the public is aware of who's getting awards, what company is getting awards, how much it's for, what it's for, and what the required deadline is to complete the project.
okay, let's take a 2-minute recess.
Website's not good enough. People don't look at the website. the following disclosure requirement shall apply. A, the Department of Education shall publish the following information in local newspapers within 24 hours of the deadline to pick up bidding information for requests for interest or requests for proposal packets for each project pursuant to this section. Name of contractor, name of company, company physical address, specific names of owners of company picking up the information, brief project description, required completion date for project. B, the Department of Education shall publish the following information in newspapers within 24 hours of an award for each project pursuant to this section. Name of contractor, name of company, company physical address, specific names of owners of company receiving award, amount of award, brief project description, required completion date of project. I think, Mr. Speaker, that at least these amendments will help by making certain that the public is fully aware of how the money is being, for these projects is actually being awarded, and also to know who has expressed interest in undertaking these projects. We know we already have a law dealing with websites, but this is important so that people who don't have access to computers and who aren't interested or have the time to go online can see this in the newspapers. Probably I would make one amendment to say Guam newspapers. If we can insert the name Guam before newspaper in both Section A and Section B, I think that would be very good. Guam newspapers. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Senator Guthertz. Any senators wish to be heard on the Guthertz amendment? Speaker One, Pat, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I do rise in support of the amendment. What I like to do, however, is to amend it to this extent. One is that it not only then be published in local newspapers, or Guam rather, newspapers, that news mediums, but to also add that it be posted on their website. Yeah, but that was one of the things that was brought up. The other is, and I like this, but I think it's missing one piece. The fact that the A part is great because these are the call for interest or for proposals, so what's going out, what's available. Now, what I also think needs to happen, and that should be a new B, and then renumber B to C, is the offers, what came in. So then we would have a list of all the offers, the different companies coming in and using the same thing, the name of the contractor that had put in an offer, not, of course, disclosing dollar amount, but just names, not necessarily, because these are all sealed. We don't know what the details of them are, but the company's address also, and the names of the companies. We don't need to do the brief description or required. So it'll be just the 3, 1, 2, and 3, the name of the contractor, the offer, an address, and the names of the companies. So then we would know, again, who those companies are, and that will be for Part B, and then the original B will be renumbered to C.
Does everybody understand the amendment proposed by the Speaker? Anybody wish to be heard on the WAMPAT amendment to the Guthertz amendment? Senator Pangilinan, did I see your hand? Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I certainly understand the intent of here, but I'm just saying that from a logistics and administrative point of view, this compliance with this is really unenforceable, and you're not able to do this. For those of us who continue to publish public hearing notices in the newspaper, you cannot call up today and say, I want to put in an ad in the paper tomorrow. So to say that you have to do it within 24 hours, I think just logistically and administratively, the deadlines for the newspaper will not allow you to do that. So that's just a point of information that I want to impart on the body.
Senator Tony Addie, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Probably on that issue there from the previous speaker, maybe we can put an amendment there instead of shall publish. Department of Education shall submit for publication the following information within the 24-hour deadline.
Anybody on the add an amendment to the, can, Senator Tom Adda.
I just have a question on item A there. I think since these submittals are going to be in sealed envelopes, all you would have is, let's say, from XYZ company, and until you open those envelopes, you really don't know the details then of the specific names of the owners, because I guess there's a document in there that says, okay, list all the owners or something. So you wouldn't know that at the time that the RFP packets have been picked up. So I would amend that by deleting really that item A3, because I don't think we would know that information until you've opened the envelopes.
Thank you, Senator Adda. Senator Guthers.
I know this is unusual in terms of our normal procurement process, but this is an unusual bill. And the whole point is people want to know. People want to know who are interested in these projects. And I don't think they should have the veil to protect the public from knowing who they are when they pick up the packets. I know this is not what normally happens, but this is something that should be disclosed. Because if we only find out after the award is made, it's sort of defeating the purpose of the bill.
Let's take a minute.